Adrian Cross set down his phone on the marble kitchen counter, and he didn't look at Elena when he said it. I found someone else. 3 words. No build-up. No apology hiding inside them. Just 3 words delivered the way a man might cancel a meeting. Efficiently, without sentiment, with the quiet confidence of someone who had already moved on before the conversation started. Elena stood in the doorway of the apartment they had shared for 2 years, still holding the grocery bag she'd carried up 4 flights of stairs, a carton of eggs, his favorite coffee, pasta she'd planned to cook that evening. She set the bag down on the counter beside his phone and looked at him for a long moment. He finally looked back. His expression wasn't cruel. It was worse than that. It was patient. I think you've always known we weren't the same kind of people, he said. I need someone who understands what I'm building. Elena picked up her keys. She walked out. If this story reaches you wherever you are, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. 3 years later, the CEO finds the woman. He once said, I've found someone else. The apartment had been Elena's idea first. She was the one who'd spotted the listing. A narrow walk-up in the Millbrook district, 3rd floor, east-facing windows that caught the morning light in a way that made even February look forgiving. She'd texted Adrian the photos at 7 in the morning with a string of exclamation points she now found embarrassing to remember. He'd called her back 12 minutes later, already calculating square footage and resale potential. And by that afternoon, they were standing together in the empty living room while a tired realtor pretended not to notice that they couldn't stop touching each other. That was 2.5 years before the grocery bag. 2.5 years before the eggs and the coffee and the pasta and the 3 words he delivered like a quarterly report. Elena Hart was 31 years old the evening Adrian Cross told her he'd found someone else. She had just gotten a small promotion at Clearfield Analytics, junior data strategist, nothing glamorous, but she'd worked for it, and she was proud of it. She had a weekend tradition of farmers market visits and terrible romantic comedies she watched with her friend Suki. She had a watering schedule for 6 plants she'd named after classic literature characters. She had a life that was quieter than some people's and fuller than she usually let herself acknowledge. She had Adrian, whom she loved in that specific inconvenient way, not blindly, not without knowing his faults, but genuinely, the way you love someone after you've watched them be petty and exhausted and wrong and still chosen to stay. She thought he felt the same. She was wrong about that. It wasn't that she'd missed the signs. She'd seen them. The longer hours, the way his attention during dinner had started drifting somewhere past her left shoulder, the increasing frequency of "I'll be late tonight" delivered via text instead of call. She'd noticed. She'd told herself it was the company's Series B, which had been brutal on everyone. She'd told herself that relationships went through contractions, that closeness was cyclical, that she should give him space and not crowd him with her insecurities. She'd cooked his favorite coffee. She'd carried it up 4 flights of stairs. He'd said 3 words and waited for her to react. The thing that would stay with Elena longest wasn't the words themselves. It was his expression, that particular brand of calm that wasn't kindness or cruelty, but something in between, something managerial. He'd looked at her the way you look at a situation you've already analyzed and resolved. He had decided. He had moved on, internally, before he'd even spoken. The conversation wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. She didn't cry in front of him. That mattered to her, though she couldn't have explained why. She took her keys and her coat and left the grocery bag on the counter. His eggs, his coffee, his pasta, and walked down 4 flights of stairs and out into the January air and sat in her car for 22 minutes before she was able to drive. She cried on the way to Suki's apartment. She pulled over twice. Suki Yamada had known Elena since graduate school and possessed the rare quality of knowing when to make tea and when to pour something stronger. That night, she poured something stronger, set it on the coffee table without comment, and sat beside Elena on the couch, while Elena told her what had happened in the fractured, repetitive way that shock produces. Circling back to the same moment, the same 3 words, trying to find the part she'd missed. He said he needs someone who understands what he's building, Elena said for the 3rd time. I know, Suki said, for the third time. I understood what he was building. I was at every pitch meeting he asked me to review. I spent 3 weekends proofreading investor decks. I know. He said we weren't the same kind of people. Suki was quiet for a moment. Then, did you eat anything today? Don't do that. I'm not doing anything. I'm asking if you ate. Elena looked at the glass in her hand. I was going to make pasta. Suki got up and went to the kitchen and came back 10 minutes later with scrambled eggs on toast because that was what she had. Elena ate half of it mechanically and felt marginally better, and then felt guilty for feeling better, and then told herself that was stupid. He's not a bad person, she said, which was the thing she kept coming back to because it would have been easier if he were. He decided I didn't fit. That's enough to be a bad person about, Suki said mildly. Elena slept on Suki's couch that night and the night after. On the third day she went back to the apartment. Adrian had moved most of his things with a speed that suggested preparation, and packed her own belongings into 11 boxes and called a moving company. She found a studio apartment in a different neighborhood. She paid first and last month's rent from her savings and told herself this was fine, this was manageable, this was just the next thing. She was efficient about it. She had to be. Adrian Nathaniel Cross was 34 years old, and by most visible measurements, he was exceptional. CrossVault Technologies had been his since he was 27, built from a pitch deck and $70,000 borrowed against a life insurance policy his father had left him. By 30, he was on 3 regional business journals' lists of entrepreneurs to watch. By 33, CrossVault's enterprise software platform had contracts with 11 Fortune 500 companies, an evaluation that made serious investors take him very seriously indeed. He had a talent for identifying inefficiencies in systems, in markets, in people, and restructuring them into something that performed better. He applied this talent consistently, sometimes indiscriminately. Meredith Sloan was 38, the founder of an adjacent fintech company, and she moved through rooms the way Adrian did, with the particular gravity of someone accustomed to being the most capable person present. They had met at a conference in October. By December, Adrian had decided she was the right kind of person for the life he was building. The calculation was not romantic exactly, but it was not cynical either. Or at least he didn't think of it that way. He thought of it as clarity, knowing what he needed and making a deliberate choice toward it. He told himself Elena would land on her feet. She was capable. She was resilient. She'd be fine. He moved this assessment to the back of his mind and got on with things. The first month was productive. He closed a partnership deal he'd been working for 8 months. CrossVault's Q1 numbers came in stronger than projected. He and Meredith attended 2 industry events together and were photographed in ways that generated the right kind of social media attention. Everything was moving in the right direction. He thought about Elena on a Tuesday morning in February, 3 weeks after he'd ended it. He was standing in his kitchen, the kitchen of the new place, a loft in the Garfield Tower development, making coffee, and he reached for the brand she'd always bought before catching himself. He stood there for a moment with the cabinet open. Then he bought a different brand. Elena found out she was pregnant on a Wednesday evening in March. She'd been running on reduced sleep for 2 weeks, a combination of long hours, the particular anesthetic of overwork that she was using very deliberately, and what she'd been telling herself was a minor immune dip. The fatigue had a different texture than exhaustion, though. She recognized it the way you recognize a piece of music you haven't heard in years. Not consciously at first, just a low hum of something familiar. She took the test at 6:15 in the evening in the bathroom of her studio apartment, sitting on the cold tile floor with her back against the wall, and she watched the second line appear with the particular quality of attention you give to things that are going to change everything. She sat there for a long time. She did not call Adrian. That thought came and went in approximately 4 seconds. She had replayed the conversation in the kitchen often enough, his patience, his calm, his managerial expression, to know, with a certainty that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with clarity, that walking back into that narrative would be the worst thing she could do. He had made a decision about who fit in his life. A pregnancy announcement was not going to reverse that decision. It was going to complicate it, contractualize it, rope her into a permanent negotiation with a man who had looked at her like a situation he'd already resolved. She would not do that to herself. She would not do that to the child. She sat on the cold bathroom floor and made a different calculation. It would be hard. She knew that without romanticizing it. She was a junior data strategist making a salary that covered her studio apartment and her bills and not much more. She had student loans. She had no family nearby. Her mother was in Portland. Her father had remarried and maintained a cordial distance. She had Suki, who was loyal and present and also working 2 jobs herself. It was going to be genuinely, practically difficult. She got up off the floor and washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. "Okay," she said. Just that. One word. But it had weight. She told Suki the following Sunday over coffee. Suki's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, concern, calculation, and then something that settled into a kind of serious warmth. "Are you keeping it?" Suki asked. "Yes." "Okay." Suki turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Are you telling him?" Elena had expected the question. She'd thought about it for 4 days. "No." Suki didn't argue. She looked at Elena carefully. "That's a hard position to hold." "I know." Down the line, sit. "I know, Suki." Suki nodded slowly. "Okay, then what do you need right now?" Elena looked out the window of the coffee shop. A Saturday morning in early March, people with dogs and strollers and reusable bags, the city doing its ordinary weekend thing. She watched a small child trying to pull a balloon free from where it had gotten tangled in a wrought iron fence while his mother crouched beside him, patient and close. "I need to figure out how to do this somewhere cheaper," Elena said. "I'm going to have to move." She found Harrow's Cove by accident. She'd been searching apartment listings within a 2-hour radius of the city, driven by a combination of math and instinct, the recognition that she needed to reduce her monthly expenses significantly, and that she couldn't do that while staying in a market that had become hostile to single incomes. When she came across a listing for a rental cottage in a coastal town she'd never heard of. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, a monthly rate that seemed like a misprint. She drove down on a Saturday in April, slightly sick with first trimester nausea, with her GPS arguing with the coastal highway and a paper coffee cup wedged between the seats that kept threatening to spill. Harrow's Cove was 2 hours south, a seaside town that had the particular character of places that had been economically modest for long enough to develop real personality. A main street of independent businesses, a harbor with working boats alongside pleasure craft, streets of older homes in various states of upkeep, the kind of neighborhood where someone had planted roses 20 years ago and they'd gone enormous and spectacular and slightly wild. The cottage was on a dead-end street called Pelican Run, 3 blocks from the water. It had a screened porch and a lemon tree in the yard that was doing optimistically well, and floors that creaked in 2 specific spots, the landlord pointed out apologetically. Elena stood in the small kitchen and looked at the window over the sink, which had a view of the yard and the lemon tree, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, the specific quality of a place where something could actually start. "I'll take it," she said. The landlord, a retired postal worker named Gus, who lived next door and had spent 15 minutes apologizing for the creaking floors before Elena stopped him, looked mildly surprised. "You don't want to sleep on it?" "No," Elena said. "I know what I need." She moved to Harrow's Cove in May, 4 months pregnant, with 11 boxes and a determination she didn't examine too closely because she suspected it was partly terror, and terror was easier to manage when you kept moving. The town received her with the indifferent hospitality of small places, not unwelcoming, not particularly attentive, just present in the way that landscapes and communities can be present, available to be known if you were willing to put in the time. Elena put in the time. She had nothing else to do with her evenings except sit with the fear, and work was better than that. She found part-time work quickly, first at a local data services firm that did municipal contract work, 2 days a week, enough to keep her credentials current and her income from vanishing entirely. Then a second role, weekend shifts at a bookshop on the main street called the Reading Tide, owned by a woman named Dottie Crane, who was 71 years old and had the posture of someone who'd been correcting other people's grammar her whole life. Dottie hired Elena after a 7-minute conversation, during which she asked Elena 4 questions about books and one about whether she intended to stay, and Elena answered all 5 honestly. "You'll do," Dottie said, which was apparently high praise. The bookshop became Elena's second home in the way that third spaces sometimes do. Gradually, without announcement, through accumulated hours and small rituals. She learned the inventory and the regulars. She developed opinions about display tables and argued them mildly with Dottie, who appreciated the argument more than the capitulation. She swept the back room and accepted the small paycheck and found, unexpectedly, that being useful in a contained and tangible way was better medicine than she'd thought. Her pregnancy progressed through the summer. She got bigger. The cottage got familiar. The creaking floors became known quantities. The lemon tree produced 8 lemons in July, and she made lemonade and drank it on the porch in the evenings, watching the light over the water. She had moments of doubt that arrived without warning, usually at 2 in the morning, cold arithmetic, the weight of the decision, the particular loneliness of making it alone. She didn't call Adrian. She didn't call her mother more than once a week, keeping those calls deliberate and steady so as not to alarm her. She called Suki, who drove down twice during the summer and brought food and sat on the porch and talked about ordinary things with the specific generosity of someone who knows you need ordinary things. "You're doing it," Suki said, on the second visit in August. "I'm doing something," Elena said. "Same thing." Intumt. Lila was born in October at 7:42 in the morning at Harrow's Cove Memorial, a small hospital with 32 beds and a maternity ward that smelled faintly of floor cleaner and something floral and antiseptic. The labor was 17 hours, and Elena spent significant portions of it gripping the bed rail with the specific focus of someone who has decided to get through something by sheer insistence, which was, it turned out, a personality trait that served her well. Suki was there. Dottie Crane, who Elena had not invited, but who had shown up anyway with a thermos of good coffee and a knitting project she worked on in the waiting room with the patience of a woman who had decided this was where she was needed, was there. Gus, the retired postal worker, had driven Suki from the bus station at 11 the previous night without being asked, which Elena would later describe as very Harrow's Cove of him. When the nurse placed Lila in her arms, Elena looked at her daughter's face, scrunched and red and furiously present, the face of someone who had just arrived and had opinions about it, and felt the particular quality of love that has no analogy, the kind that doesn't announce itself gradually, but simply arrives at full weight, complete and immediate. "Hi," Elena said, very quietly. Lila opened her eyes, dark and searching, already specific, already unmistakably her own, and looked at the world with an expression that suggested she was reserving judgment. Elena laughed, a single surprised sound. "Fair enough," she said. Lila was not an easy infant. Elena had read enough to know that the particular fantasy of a sleeping, serene newborn was largely a myth, but she had not fully understood what this meant in practice until she was living it. The feeds at 2 and 4 and 6, the specific desperation of the third week, the way that sleep deprivation at that depth produces a strange, altered state that is neither fully awake nor asleep, just a sustained operating mode, running on instinct and caffeine, and the fierce, simple love of someone who is holding something irreplaceable. She dropped a mug on the kitchen floor at 3 a.m. and sat down beside the broken pieces and cried for 10 minutes, and then cleaned it up. She called in late to the data firm once and felt guilty about it for days. She asked Gus if he'd mind being on a short list in case of emergencies, expecting polite reluctance, and receiving instead a yes so immediate it almost embarrassed her. Gus had raised 3 kids, he reminded her, and he was retired, and what exactly was he saving his schedule for? Dottie reduced Elena's hours for the first 8 weeks without discussing it, and deposited the same amount in her account as if the full hours had been worked, and when Elena came in to thank her and protest, Dottie told her not to be tedious about it. The town, slowly, became hers. At 3 months, Lila discovered that faces were interesting. She would study Elena's face with the intense concentration of a scientist examining data, tracking the movement of her mouth, watching her eyes, occasionally reaching a small hand toward her chin with the intent expression of someone attempting verification. At 5 months, she laughed for the first time. It was the middle of a Thursday afternoon. Elena was making a ridiculous face while attempting to get Lila to eat pureed sweet potato, and something about the specific configuration of Elena's expression struck Lila as hilarious, and she produced a laugh, full, genuine, surprised at itself. And Elena laughed back, and they stayed like that, the two of them, laughing in the small kitchen of the Pelican Run cottage for much longer than made practical sense. Lila was, from the beginning, her own person. She liked patterns, spent long minutes studying the tile floor, the way light moved through curtains, the arrangement of blocks she knocked over and then regarded with apparent interest. She had strong preferences about her stuffed animals and expressed these preferences clearly. She had a specific smile she deployed when she was about to do something she knew was inadvisable, which Elena recognized as a warning system and found charming anyway. She looked like Elena in the shape of her face, in her coloring, in the particular quality of her attention, and she looked in other ways that Elena noticed quietly and did not spend time on, like someone else. His eyes, the angle of his smile when something really landed. Elena looked at these moments and folded them away carefully and kept moving. In the city, Adrian Cross was building something enormous. Cross Vault Series C closed at $94 million in February. The same February, Elena was taking pregnancy tests on cold bathroom tiles, though he did not know that, and would not know it for a long time. The number was real and substantial, and the coverage was good, and there were handshakes in conference rooms, and a celebratory dinner at a restaurant where the portions were studied and architectural and cost more than Elena's monthly grocery budget. He and Meredith were photographed at the dinner. The photo circulated on LinkedIn and in 2 industry newsletters. They looked in the photo exactly as they were supposed to look: successful, intentional, formidable. Adrian kept the photo on his phone for approximately a week before he stopped looking at it. Not because anything was wrong. Nothing was demonstrably wrong. Meredith was exactly who she was: sharp, driven, straightforward, entirely capable of discussing market positioning over dinner without making it feel like homework. She was the person he had calculated her to be, which was, if he was being honest in the way he rarely allowed himself to be, part of the problem. He had been accurate about her. There was nothing to discover. The calculation had been correct, and the result was correct, and something in him was quietly, persistently dissatisfied with correct. He told himself it was stress. The Series C brought obligations. He had a board now that he had to manage differently. He had employees he was responsible for in new ways. He worked later. He read fewer books. He went to more events that were important for the company and came home from them with the specific fatigue of someone who has been performing rather than living. He did not think about Elena often. When he did, it came in small moments. The particular way morning light moved through a window, the smell of a specific coffee brand, the way a certain kind of quiet felt in a room. He identified these moments for what they were, filed them somewhere interior, and continued. He was building something. That was what mattered. The empire rose. The numbers improved. The recognition accumulated. And underneath all of it, running like a background process he didn't know how to close, something empty persisted. Small, quiet, stubborn as a stone. He did not know what it was. He thought perhaps he just needed more. He kept building. Percent. By the time Lila was 1 year old, Elena's life had taken on a shape she had not planned but had genuinely built. The data firm had offered her a larger role, still part-time, but better paid, the kind of work that kept her skills current and her mind engaged. She was spending 3 days a week there and 2 at the bookshop, and the schedule was demanding in the way that schedules with small children are always demanding, which is to say comprehensively, but it was also, in its own exhausting way, hers. She had friends now. Real ones. Not the proximity friendship of shared circumstances, but the kind earned through accumulated presence and honest conversation. There was Suki, still, faithful and distant and close in all the ways that mattered. There was Dottie, who expressed affection through criticism, and whose criticism Elena had learned to read as fluently as language. There was a woman named Petra, who ran the farmer's market flower stall and had a 2-year-old named Benji, and who had appeared beside Elena's stroller one September morning and said simply, "You look like you know what you're doing. I'm trying to figure that out. Can we have coffee?" Which was the most direct and honest approach to friendship Elena had encountered in years, and she'd said yes immediately. There was Gus, who had become, without anyone naming it, the kind of steady adjacent presence: borrowed tools, emergency child care, opinions on whether the lemon tree needed fertilizer. That Elena's daughter would later describe simply as Gus, he lives next door, with the particular confidence of a child who has always known her world to be populated by reliable people. It was a life, not the life she'd expected. Harder in some ways than anything she'd anticipated, softer in others, more real than anything she'd known in the apartment with the east-facing windows and the grocery bags that went to waste. Lila's first birthday party was held in the backyard of the Pelican Run cottage. 14 people and a lemon-flavored cake that Dottie contributed and which Lila ate with a focused intensity that was unmistakably characteristic. There were photos. Balloons that required 45 minutes of effort and produced 12 adequately sized results. There was the specific noise of people who have chosen to be in the same place, which is different from the noise of people who happen to be there, and which Elena recognized as warmth and stood inside it for a moment before someone needed something. She stood in her backyard with her daughter on her hip and the October light coming in low and gold over the back fence, and let herself feel what she had built. Not perfect, not easy, not the kind of life that photographed well for announcements. Hers. Lila, at 2, had language and used it enthusiastically. She had opinions about everything: her socks, the order of books at bedtime, which vegetables were acceptable, and which represented a fundamental violation of her trust. She was fascinated by animals and had a running commentary on every dog she encountered on the street that was detailed enough to embarrass strangers into stopping to let her pet them. She drew constantly, on paper, on her chalkboard, occasionally on surfaces that were not designated for drawing, and always with the specific seriousness of someone engaged in important work. She asked questions with the indiscriminate curiosity of children at that age, absorbing answers and using them as launching pads for further questions in a chain that could run for 20 minutes and leave Elena genuinely uncertain what had started it. She had not yet asked about her father. Elena knew it was coming. She had thought about it, turning it over, trying out different framings, none of them entirely satisfying. She had decided she would not lie, and she would not simplify it beyond the understanding of the child asking, and she would approach it the way she approached most difficult things: directly, honestly, with as much gentleness as she could manage. She had decided she would not say Adrian had been a bad person, because she didn't believe that, and teaching her daughter things she didn't believe was not something she was willing to do. She had decided she would not say he didn't know, because that was more complicated. She had decided mostly to wait for the question. Lila had not yet asked. Lila was, at 2, standing in the kitchen drawing a horse on a piece of paper while Elena made dinner, narrating the horse's qualities to herself in a low, concentrated voice. The horse had, according to its creator, very nice hair. It was also fast and kind and had a best friend who was a different color. Elena stood at the stove and listened and stirred and felt the particular weight of a moment she recognized she was inside, the kind you cannot hold but can be present for. The light coming through the window over the sink, the smell of garlic and oil, her daughter's voice describing a horse's nice hair with complete seriousness. She had made choices that had cost her things she had wanted. She had also made choices that had built this. And this particular Thursday evening in a small kitchen in a seaside town, her daughter at the table, dinner on the stove, the lemon tree visible through the window. This was real. It was, she thought, enough. Not the end of wanting, not the cessation of hard moments, not a fixed permanent state, but enough. For now, it was enough. And somewhere, 2 hours north in a glass-walled office, above a city he had built and still somehow couldn't locate himself inside, Adrian Cross sat at a desk full of things that were succeeding and felt the specific, unnamed emptiness of a man who is optimized for everything except the right things and didn't yet understand what was missing. He would. But not tonight. Tonight Lila drew a horse with very nice hair, and Elena made dinner, and the light over Harrow's Cove came in low and gold and stayed as long as it could. Layla turned 3 in October, and the party was smaller that year. Just Petra and Benji, Gus with a store-bought cake he'd decorated himself with plastic horses because he'd remembered about the horses. Dottie, who arrived with a wrapped set of colored pencils and the expression of someone who had not come to a party but happened to be in the area, and Suki, who had driven down the night before and slept on the pull-out couch and spent Saturday morning making Lila's favorite breakfast, which was scrambled eggs with too much cheese, a preference Lila held with the conviction of doctrine. It was a good party, loud in the contained way of small gatherings with children present, and then quiet afterward in the specific way of a house after people have left. Dishes in the sink, deflated balloons on the floor, a child asleep in the next room with chocolate frosting she'd missed on her left ear. Elena sat at the kitchen table after, with a half glass of wine she wasn't really drinking, and listened to the house settle around her. 3 years. She did the arithmetic occasionally, not obsessively, not with any particular grief attached to it, just the way you take stock, the way honest people do when they're not pretending things cost less than they did. 3 years since a kitchen counter and 3 words in a grocery bag she'd left behind. 3 years of building something from the ground up, without a blueprint, without a partner, without anyone to split the 2 in the morning hours with when Lila had a fever and the thermometer gave a different reading every time. She had done it, not cleanly, not gracefully. There were months she looked back on with the particular wince of someone reviewing footage they'd rather not. The February she'd gotten behind on rent because the data firm had restructured its contracts and her hours had been cut without warning, forcing a conversation with Gus she'd rehearsed 12 times and still fumbled, accepting a short-term loan she'd paid back in 4 months while eating rice and beans with the grim discipline of someone working a problem. The March when Lila had a respiratory infection that ran for 3 weeks, and Elena had missed enough work to compromise her standing at the firm and had to spend 2 months demonstrating reliability she'd already established, which was exactly the kind of invisible double effort that exhausted her in ways she couldn't easily explain to people who hadn't lived it. The nights. The specific category of nights when Lila was finally asleep and the house was quiet, and there was nothing between Elena and the full weight of what she was carrying. The awareness that if she got sick, if she got injured, if something structural went wrong, there was no second income, no backup. Just her. She had lain in the dark on some of those nights and held the fear directly because she had found it was better to look at it than to pretend it wasn't there, and she had breathed through it and in the morning gotten up and made breakfast and gone to work. She had also, in fairness, done it. The firm had offered her a senior role in January, a real one, senior data analyst, full-time, a salary that meant she could stop calculating whether she could afford to take Lila to the pediatric dentist before the end of the month. She had taken it, and it had required difficult negotiation on childcare that involved a new arrangement with a local daycare Petra had recommended, and a modified schedule at the bookshop that Dottie had restructured without complaint, and with only mild disparaging commentary about the general unreliability of the professional world. "You're finally getting paid what you're worth," Dottie had said, which from Dottie constituted a standing ovation. Things were steadier now, not comfortable in the way she'd once imagined comfortable, not the frictionless ease of 2 incomes and backup plans, but stable, with the specific durability of things built slowly and held together by real effort. She knew what she had. She didn't take it for granted. She finished the wine and washed her glass and went to check on Lila, who was asleep on her stomach with her arms thrown out to the sides in the particular posture of someone who is completely surrendered to rest. Elena stood in the doorway for a moment, the frosting on her ear, the even weight of her breathing. The small collection of stuffed animals arranged in a precise order Lila maintained with the rigor of a curator, the brown horse at the head, the rabbit at the foot, a battered penguin named Ned who occupied a lateral position of apparent honor. Elena watched her daughter sleep and felt the specific familiar mixture, love that still surprised her with its weight, and beneath it something quieter and more complicated, the knowledge of what Lila didn't yet know about where she came from. The question was coming. She could feel it approaching the way you feel weather before it arrives. She went to bed and slept 7 hours and woke up to Lila standing at the bedside holding the brown horse and announcing that it was morning. "I know," Elena said. "Ned is hungry," Lila said. "Ned doesn't eat." Lila considered this. "He is hungry anyway." Elena sat up and rubbed her face. "Go get your slippers on. I'll make oatmeal." "With the brown sugar?" "With the brown sugar." Lila left at a run. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and let herself have 30 seconds of stillness. Just that. Just the room, and the morning, and the sound of her daughter's feet on the hardwood before she stood up and started the day. The bookshop had regulars the way all good bookshops do, and Elena had come to know them with the particular intimacy of the service relationship, which is its own kind of closeness. You learn what people reach for, what they avoid, what they tell you in passing that they would not tell a friend. There was Harold, who was 72 and came every Thursday for a new mystery novel and always pretended he hadn't already read half the ones Elena suggested, which she had figured out in the first month and chosen to work with rather than around. There was a woman named Cecile who came in with her teenage granddaughter every few weeks, the granddaughter always slightly mortified and eventually always charmed, and who bought literary fiction with the methodical consistency of someone working through a private curriculum. There was a man in his 40s named Dom who came in irregularly and intense and always bought 3 books at a time in categories that had no apparent logic until Elena had gradually pieced together that he was trying to understand something about his marriage, working it from multiple angles, history and psychology and memoir, and occasionally fiction. And she had never said anything about this directly, but she had started quietly shelving the things she thought might actually help near his usual spot by the window. Dom came in on a Tuesday in November, 3 weeks after Lila's birthday, and stood in front of the new arrivals table with his hands in his jacket pockets. "How's the kid?" he asked. Dom asked about Lila the way some of the regulars did, not intrusively, but genuinely. The accumulated interest of people who had heard about the birthday party preparations across multiple visits. 3 now, Elena said from behind the counter. Opinionated. They get more opinionated, Dom said. My youngest is 8. He has opinions about which direction the toilet paper should go. Lila has opinions about which specific cloud looks the most like a horse. Dom smiled. Which one does? All of them, apparently. Every cloud is a horse. He bought 2 books, a history of a mid-century trial, and a novel Elena had been quietly pushing for 6 weeks, and left. Elena watched him go and thought, not for the first time, that the bookshop had given her something she hadn't known she needed, a window into the texture of other lives, the ongoing, unresolved, imperfect ordinariness of how people actually move through their years. It had a way of proportioning things. Petra's flower stall at the farmer's market was 3 spaces down from a woman named Colleen, who sold jams and who had a strong opinion about everything, which meant that setting up next to Colleen was either exhausting or entertaining depending on the week, and Elena, when she helped Petra occasionally on Saturday mornings, had come to a sophisticated appreciation of Colleen's specific brand of authority. You need to date someone, Colleen said to Elena one Saturday in November, between a customer transaction and the adjustment of a jam jar display. Elena was arranging dahlias. Good morning to you too, Colleen. I mean it. You're 34, you're not tired looking, which is more than I expected given that child of yours. Someone should be taking you out to dinner. I take myself out to dinner. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Petra appeared from behind a bucket of eucalyptus. Colleen is doing this to me too. I'm also apparently wasting my youth. You are, Colleen said without heat. Both of you. This town has perfectly functional single men in it. Elena set down a dahlia. Can I ask what prompted this? Daniel Marsh was in here last week buying jam for his mother, and he asked about you. Elena thought about Daniel Marsh, who ran the hardware store on the main street, who had 3 dogs and a truck he was always working on, and who said hello with the careful politeness of someone who was practicing. He was 40 and recently divorced and kind in an uncomplicated way that she found both appealing and slightly alarming. He asked about me to you, Elena said. He asked whether you were seeing anyone. I told him I didn't know, but I'd find out. Colleen. You can be annoyed with me when you're happy, Colleen said firmly, and turned to a new customer. Elena looked at Petra. She said the same thing to me about the yoga instructor, Petra said. What did you do? I went for coffee, Petra paused. It was fine. He mostly talked about his chakras. Are you going again? Possibly. The chakra conversation was a first date thing. I'm reserving judgment. Elena arranged 3 more dahlias and thought about Daniel Marsh and his 3 dogs and his careful politeness, and felt the specific hesitance that she'd been carrying for 3 years. Not grief, not unresolved feeling for Adrian, not that. She was clear about that. but a particular wariness about the logistics of opening something up, the negotiation of a new person, the work of it, the risk of it. The way that bringing someone into a life that included Lila meant something different and higher stakes than it had when her life had been primarily her own. She had not dated anyone since Adrian, not because she was waiting or healing in any dramatic narrative sense, but because the days were full and the energy was finite, and she had not yet felt anything strong enough to justify the effort. She mentioned Daniel Marsh to Suki that evening on the phone. "Go for coffee," Suki said immediately. "It might be weird." "Everything is weird. Go for coffee." "I have a 3-year-old. He knows that. Colleen definitely told him." Elena made a sound. "She probably gave him a full briefing. She probably gave him notes." Suki was quiet for a moment. "Elena, you're allowed to want things. You're allowed to try. It doesn't have to be the permanent thing. It's just coffee." Elena looked at the kitchen ceiling. Through the wall, she could hear the specific sound of Lila talking to her stuffed animals, the horse being given a complicated narrative with sound effects. "Just coffee," Elena said. "Just coffee," Suki confirmed. She went for coffee with Daniel Marsh on a Thursday afternoon in December while Lila was at daycare. They sat at a table near the window of the bakery on Main Street, and Daniel ordered a black coffee, and Elena ordered a latte, and they talked for 2 hours with the slightly formal quality of two people who are being honest about why they're there and find it awkward and do it anyway. He was good company, quieter than she'd expected, with a dry humor that appeared without fanfare and disappeared again before it could be called upon to carry weight. He asked about Lila with genuine curiosity, not the performing interest quality of someone checking a box, but the actual curiosity of a man who liked children and knew how to engage with the subject of them. He had a daughter of his own, 12, lived mostly with her mother in the next town, came to him on alternating weekends and some holidays, and he talked about her with the specific combination of pride and careful restraint of a divorced parent who had learned to hold the joy and the loss of it at the same time. "You figuring out the long-distance parenting thing?" Elena asked. "Getting better at it," he said. "The first year was rough. I kept trying to make every weekend a perfect weekend, and she could tell I was performing, and it made everything worse." "What changed?" "I stopped planning." He turned his coffee cup. "Now we watch movies she likes. I make dinner. She tells me about her friends. Normal stuff. It works better." Elena thought about that. Normal stuff. "Normal stuff is what there is," he said. "Eventually." They split the check despite his offer to pay, which he accepted with good grace, and walked out onto Main Street in the December cold, and he said he'd like to do it again sometime, and she said she would too, and they said goodbye with the contained hopefulness of two people who had both been through enough to prefer honesty to theater. Walking back to her car, Elena felt lighter than she had in a while. Not for any large reason, just the reminder that ordinary companionship was possible, that the world had not reduced itself to the single channel of her own effort. She picked Lila up from daycare, and on the drive home, Lila asked 3 questions about clouds. December in Harrow's Cove had a quality Elena had come to love despite initially finding it bleak. The particular quiet of a seaside town out of season, when the summer visitors were gone and the town was returned to its actual inhabitants, who revealed themselves as a different and more interesting set of people than the warm-weather version suggested. The Main Street lights went up the first weekend of the month. The harbor took on a gray-blue light that was cold and specific and somehow beautiful. Dottie put a real fire in the bookshop's old fireplace for the first time since Elena had worked there, and the shop smell changed, books and fire and something ancient in the walls. And Elena found herself staying late more than she needed to because the room was worth being in. Lila entered her I want to help phase, which was both touching and catastrophic. She helped with cooking by adding ingredients unprompted. She helped with laundry by refolding things Elena had already folded. She helped Gus water his plants one afternoon and overwatered everything with a confidence that Gus described as thorough. "She's very committed," Gus said, leaning on the fence between their yards. "She's very 3, Elena said. "Same thing." He paused. "You doing okay? You look tired." "I am tired." "The coffee machine's broken again," he said, which was both a report and an invitation. She brought Lila over and they drank coffee on Gus's porch. His coffee, which was better than hers because he'd had 40 years to develop the habit, while Lila examined his garden with the systematic focus of a small scientist, narrating her findings. "That one's yellow," Lila told Gus, pointing to a marigold. "That's right," Gus said. "Why?" "That's the color it is." Lila considered this for a long moment. "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied, and moved on to the next flower. Elena watched her daughter move through the garden and felt the specific quality of a moment where everything was small and fine and enough. She had learned over 3 years to stay inside these moments when they came. Not to leave them early, not to tilt ahead to the next thing, just to be present for as long as they lasted. She had also learned that they did not last, that the work resumed, that the hard patches came back around like weather. She had learned this not philosophically, but practically, bodily, through the experience of having lived it. She stayed on Gus's porch in the December afternoon and drank her coffee and watched her daughter demand explanations from a marigold. Adrian Cross turned 37 in January and marked the occasion by working until 10 at night on a contract expansion that required his attention and could not in good conscience wait for a birthday. He was aware of the irony. He had a staff of 219 people, a company valued at over $200 million, a corner office with a view of a city he had built a significant piece of, and he spent his birthday evening reviewing legal language with his general counsel and eating a sandwich someone had left on his desk. Meredith had sent flowers to the office, a gesture he'd registered and appreciated. They had dinner on Saturday, a reservation at a place that required 3 weeks' notice and delivered an experience that was impeccable and entirely unmemorable. He ordered the fish. She ordered the lamb. They talked about an acquisition she was considering. He listened with genuine interest because the business was genuinely interesting, and somewhere midway through the entree he noticed they'd been sitting for 90 minutes without having a single conversation that was not about work or strategy or the architecture of their respective empires. He didn't say anything about this. He drove home at 11 and stood in his kitchen, the Garfield Tower kitchen, clean and specific and designed for someone who valued quality, and poured a glass of water and drank it at the counter and thought about nothing in particular for a while, which was the closest he got to rest. Crossvault was not struggling. Everything he had built was functioning exactly as designed. The board was pleased. The projections were solid. He had recently been profiled in a national business magazine in terms that were generous and largely accurate. The journalist had asked him what drove him. He had given the answer he always gave, about building something that lasts, about solving real problems, about the particular satisfaction of seeing a thing work that you imagined from nothing. Good answers. True answers. She had asked him, near the end of the interview, what he did when he went home. He had paused before answering. "Work," he'd said, and she'd laughed and written it down as a quote. He thought about that pause sometimes, the hesitation before answering a simple question. What do you do when you go home? He had paused because the honest answer was that he worked, and the honest answer also was that coming home felt like relocating the work, not escaping it. The apartment was a good apartment. It contained everything it was supposed to contain. It had no quality of arrival. He was aware this was his own doing. He had optimized for exactly what he'd gotten. He did not have the vocabulary yet for what was wrong, which was partly why it persisted. You cannot fix a thing you cannot name. Meredith, in the spring, named it for him, which he had not expected. They were at her apartment, a Sunday evening, dinner she'd cooked from a recipe she'd found and actually enjoyed making, which he'd known because it was one of the few times she cooked without discussing the process in terms of efficiency. They were washing up, both of them at the sink in the comfortable parallel way of two people who have been in each other's spaces long enough to move around each other without negotiating, and she said without preamble, "I think we should stop." He turned to look at her. She was drying a glass, eyes on the glass. "I've been thinking about it for a while. I think we work well together professionally. I think we like each other. I don't think either of us is in love with the other." He looked at her for a long moment. "I've been wondering when you were going to say something," he said. She looked up then. "So have I. I kept waiting to see if one of us would get there. Neither of us got there." "Neither of us got there," she agreed. They stood at the sink in her apartment with the dish towel and the clean glass and the particular clarity of two people who were both honest enough to have this conversation without making it ugly. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "I'm not," she said. "I mean, I am about the parts that deserved more, but not about this. We gave it what it had. That's fine." He drove home at 9:30 with the specific quality of someone who has been released from something they'd been maintaining, which felt, surprisingly, less like relief than he'd expected. Not because he missed what they'd had. He could already feel clearly now how much had been performance, how much had been two people assembling the correct picture rather than having an actual life together. But because ending it removed the last thing standing between him and the question he'd been avoiding. What exactly had he been building this for? He sat in his car in the parking garage for 10 minutes and let the question be there. He didn't answer it. He went upstairs. The magazine profile came out in April, and someone from Harrow's Cove left a copy at the bookshop. Specifically, left it on the counter for Dottie with a note attached that said, "Thought you'd find this interesting," which Dottie read, regarded skeptically, and placed behind the counter in the pile she kept for things she hadn't decided about yet. Elena found it 3 days later, pulling it out from under a stack of invoices. The photo on the cover was one she recognized. Not Adrian specifically, but the type, the particular composition of the successful CEO profile. Window light, serious expression managed to read as thoughtful rather than severe, the implication of a city and a future behind him. She read the headline without expecting the name, and then she read the name. She set the magazine back on the counter. She picked it up again. She read the piece standing behind the counter in the empty Thursday afternoon bookshop, while the fire in the fireplace ticked and the street was quiet outside. He was 37. Crossvault was valued at $212 million. He had said the thing about working when he got home. The journalist had found him surprisingly reflective beneath the ambition, which was the kind of framing that could mean many things. She read the piece twice, which she would not have predicted. There was nothing in it about Meredith. It had been written before the split, apparently, and mentioned a partner in the industry in a single sentence that told her nothing. There was nothing in it that was about her or about anything of what she knew. He was a cover story now. He had gotten exactly where he was going. She set the magazine down again and thought about how she felt. The answer, which surprised her slightly, was not much. Not nothing. There was a quality to looking at his face in a photograph that was different from thinking about him abstractly. A brief and specific weight. The involuntary recall of the particular texture of knowing someone well. But not grief. Not anger. Not the sustained, smoldering kind she had occasionally found in herself in the early months. What she felt mostly was the recognition that two parallel worlds existed, his, which had gone in the direction he'd designed, and hers, which had gone somewhere entirely different and which she would not trade. Lila was in daycare right now. She had drawn a horse that morning with a purple mane and presented it to Elena with the solemn gravity of a significant gift. Elena slid the magazine to the edge of the counter and covered it with the invoices. "She asked," Elena said. It was May. She was on the phone with Suki standing in the kitchen after Lila's bedtime, the specific quiet of the house after the day was done. The father question? Not directly. She asked why Benji has a daddy who picks him up sometimes and she doesn't have one. Elena turned her mug in her hands. She wasn't crying. She was just asking. Like she was asking about the clouds. Suki was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" "I said some families have a mom and a dad. Some have two moms. Some have two dads. Some have just a mom. Some have just a dad. I said our family has just me and her and people like Gus and Dottie and Suki who love us." "And?" Elena exhaled. She said, "But where's my daddy?" So I said, "He's someone I knew before she was born, and he lives far away. And maybe one day when she's older, she can know more about it." How did she take that? She thought about it. Then she asked if horses have daddies. Elena made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. I said yes, and she said okay, and went back to drawing. "Elena." I know. That's not going to hold forever. I know that. She leaned against the counter. The kitchen was clean, the dishes done, the small order she maintained because it was one of the things she could control. I know, she's 3. I bought more time. I don't have a plan for the bigger conversation yet. You'll figure it out. I'm less confident about that one. Suki was quiet again. Then, you're doing the right things. You've been doing the right things. The conversation, when it comes, you'll handle it the same way. Directly and imperfectly? That's been working. Elena looked at the kitchen window, dark now, just her reflection and the room behind her. She has his eyes, she said. I don't know if I've ever said that out loud. You haven't. She has his eyes. The shape of them, the way they go when she's thinking hard about something. She paused. She doesn't know that. She doesn't know she has anyone's eyes but mine. She's just herself. She's just Lila. Yeah, Suki said softly. I think about what I'm eventually going to have to explain, and I don't... She stopped. I don't know how you explain to a child that her father didn't leave because he didn't want her. He left before he knew she existed. How do you explain that that isn't abandonment exactly, but it is, in every practical way, what it has been? You explain it in the way you always explain hard things to her, honestly, at the level she can hold. And when she can hold more, then you give her more. Elena stood at her kitchen counter in the May dark and felt the weight of the thing she carried that was different from the ordinary weight of single parenthood. The specific thing, the withheld truth, the shape of a man she had chosen not to contact for 3 years, and the growing knowledge that her daughter had a right to information that only Elena controlled. She had made the right decision. She still believed that. She believed it clearly. The man who had set down his phone on a marble counter and delivered 3 words like a notification was not a man she was going to run toward with news he hadn't asked for. But Lila was a person. She was a specific, irreplaceable, fully real person who was going to grow up and eventually want to know where she came from. Elena couldn't solve that tonight. She couldn't solve it by herself. She told Suki she loved her and got off the phone and went to check on Lila, who was asleep with the horse tucked under her chin, her face smooth and complete in the nightlight dark, entirely untroubled. Elena stood there for a long time. Then she went to bed and lay awake for an hour before sleep came. And in the morning, Lila woke her up by putting a cold hand on her cheek and saying, "It is morning now," with the authority of a person delivering a formal announcement. And Elena pulled her into bed and held her while she wriggled and complained and eventually settled. And the day started the way days start, ordinary and continuing, full of things that needed doing. Somewhere in a glass-walled office above a city he had built, Adrian Cross was already at his desk by 7:30. He had a meeting at 8, then another at 9:30, then lunch with a board member, then the afternoon, which was also meetings. He had, sometime in the spring, started taking walks, long ones, no destination, city blocks, just movement. His assistant had learned to schedule around this and didn't ask about it. He walked and thought about the question he hadn't answered in the parking garage, which had not gotten smaller with time. What was this for? He had stopped saying to build something that lasts to himself, because the private version required more rigor than the interview version, and in private he could admit it didn't fully answer. He thought on these walks about things he had not thought about in a long time. His father, the specific smell of the apartment in childhood, the way satisfaction had felt when it was still a simple thing, a math problem solved, a broken bicycle fixed, the clean, complete feeling of understanding something clearly. He thought, occasionally, about Elena. Not obsessively, not in a way that consumed anything, but she appeared in these walks with a frequency that told him something. The particular quality of her attention, the way she had listened, the fact that being known by her had felt different from being observed by people who read his press coverage. He had thrown that away. He had made a calculation and called it clarity. He walked 6 blocks east and then 6 blocks back and went upstairs and sat at his desk and started the 8 o'clock meeting. The empire ran. The days continued. And somewhere south of the city, on a dead-end street called Pelican Run, a little girl woke up from her nap and asked for the brown horse and drew clouds in purple crayon and had, entirely without knowing it, her father's eyes. The invitation arrived at the bookshop. That was the odd part. Not to Elena's home address, not to the data firm, but to the Reading Tide, addressed to Elena Hart, care of Dottie Crane, on cream cardstock with embossed lettering that Dottie held up to the window light with the expression of someone assessing a suspect document. Hargrove Foundation, Dottie said. Children's Art Initiative. They want submissions from regional programs for their annual gala. She set the card on the counter. Apparently someone on their selection committee saw the drawings Lila did for the window display in March. Elena looked at the card. The Hargrove Foundation Gala for Arts Education, September 14th. Whitmore Hotel, Grand Ballroom. Black tie optional. The display in question had been 6 drawings Lila had done over the course of a rainy weekend in late February. Horses, mostly, but also what Lila had described as a very big cloud that is also a horse, and one that Dottie had declared the most honest depiction of the ocean she had ever seen, which had made Lila stand a little straighter. They want to display children's artwork from community programs, Dottie continued. I may have submitted Lila's drawings to the Regional Arts Board in February, without mentioning it. Elena looked up. I didn't think it would go anywhere, Dottie said in a tone that suggested she had thought it might go somewhere. Dottie. The drawings are good. The horse cloud is genuinely interesting compositionally. I'm not inventing that. She moved a pen from one side of the counter to the other. They want her to attend, as a featured young artist. You would bring her, there would be a small presentation, and they would display 6 to 8 of her pieces at the gala. Elena read the card again. The Whitmore Hotel was in the city, not across town, not a short drive, but the city, 2 hours north, the city she had specifically and deliberately left. She had been back twice in 3 years, once for a licensing exam, once for Suki's birthday. Both times she had moved through it like someone passing through an airport, purposeful and not particularly present. The city where Adrian Cross had his glass-walled office and his cover story empire, and his walks that went nowhere. I know what you're thinking, Dottie said. You don't. You're thinking it's too close to something you left behind. Dottie picked up the card and placed it precisely in front of Elena. But your daughter made something worth showing, and someone noticed, and the answer to that should not be that her mother is afraid of a city. Elena looked at the card for a long time. She was not afraid of the city. That was the accurate version. She had left the city for reasons that were practical and clear-eyed, and she had built something real in the leaving, and she did not spend her nights missing what she'd given up. But there was a quality to the prospect of returning, even for one evening, even for an entirely different purpose, that required her to be honest about what she was still carrying, which was not love, not grief, but the residual awareness of a loose thread, something unresolved, not painful, just present. Lila had his eyes, and did not know it. She'd be excited, Elena said finally. She would be beside herself, Dottie said. Elena put the card in her bag and told Dottie she'd think about it. She told Lila about it that evening, framing it the way you frame things for 3-year-olds, carefully, specifically, at the level of what would be concrete and real to her. That some people who liked art had seen her drawings and wanted to put them in a special show. That there would be a big party. That Lila would get to see her drawings on a real wall, in a real frame, like the pictures in the bookshop. Lila's expression went through several stages: processing, skepticism, dawning comprehension, and then she said with total certainty, the horse cloud one. Yes, that one too. Lila picked up her crayon and went back to drawing. Then she looked up. I should make more, she said. Probably, Elena agreed. Better ones, Lila said firmly and bent back over her paper. Well, the summer passed the way summers do when you have a small child and too much work, faster than expected and denser than remembered, a compression of ordinary days that felt endless inside them and brief looking back. Lila turned the corner into 3.5 with a set of new obsessions. She wanted to know how things worked, mechanically, causally. Why did the refrigerator make that noise? How did the car know to start? What was inside a pencil? Elena answered as accurately as she could and supplemented with library books and Gus, who had a patient engineering explanation for most things and a genuine talent for getting down to a child's eye level without condescension. The drawings multiplied. Lila worked with the focused productivity of someone who had received a commission and took it seriously. Horses remained central, but she expanded into other territories. The harbor at low tide rendered in the specific blue-gray, she mixed herself by adding too much water. A portrait of Ned the Penguin that Dottie pronounced psychologically accurate. A series she called People Walking that captured movement with the loose, instinctive energy of a child who sees before she's learned to second-guess what she sees. Elena framed 8 of them. She bought real frames, the kind with glass, from a shop in town, and she and Lila sat at the kitchen table and chose together which ones would go to the gala. It was a serious process. Lila had opinions and stated them and occasionally revised them and occasionally held firm, and Elena let her lead because it was Lila's work and Lila's call, and she was old enough to make it. "This one," Lila said, placing her hand flat on the horse cloud drawing. "That's a good one," Elena agreed. "It's the best one," Lila said, without arrogance. Just accuracy. Quote. Elena called Suki in August about the logistics. "Come stay with me," Suki said immediately. "I'll take the couch. You and Lila take the bedroom. We'll drive to the gala together." "You don't have to." "Elena, I have been waiting 3 years to meet Lila in person more than twice a year. Come stay." Elena had visited Suki twice since Harrow's Cove, both times without Lila for logistical reasons. Suki had come to Harrow's Cove 4 times, the visits landing at key moments with the reliability that characterized everything about her. The distance between them was the only genuinely difficult thing about the life Elena had built, the single cost she didn't have a workaround for. "You've met her plenty of times," Elena said. "On a screen doesn't count. I want to read her a bedtime story. I want to see what happens when she meets my cat." "Your cat hates people." "Your daughter might be the exception. She has a gift with animals. We've discussed this." Elena smiled despite herself. "Fine, we'll come Thursday. The gala's Saturday." "Perfect. I'll hide anything breakable." "That's smart." She booked it. She pressed confirm on the calendar entry and felt the particular quality of a decision that moves from abstract to real, the slight shift in the air that comes with commitment. She was going back. For one weekend. For Lila's drawings and Suki's couch, and the particular satisfaction of watching her daughter see her work on a wall in a frame with good lighting. It had nothing to do with anything else. She believed that. The drive up on a Thursday in September was Lila's first long car trip with full awareness. She had done it as an infant and as a 1-year-old and remembered none of it, but at 3.5 she was present for every mile, which meant questions. Many questions. About the highway, about trucks, about what was in the fields on either side, about clouds. There were clouds, and they required assessment. About where Suki lived and whether Suki's apartment had horses in it, and what a cat ate, and whether cats were friends with horses. "Cats and horses can be friends," Elena said, approximately 40 minutes in. "How do you know?" "I've read about it." Lila considered this. "What are their names when they are friends?" "I don't know their specific names, horses and cats in general." Lila accepted this without full satisfaction and moved to the next question, which was about clouds again. Elena drove and answered and felt the specific quality of the city approaching, the way the landscape shifted, density accumulating, the skyline eventually producing itself on the horizon with the casual authority of something that had always been there. She had not felt afraid of it. She'd told Dottie that and meant it. What she felt, coming over the bridge with Lila asleep in the back seat and the city laid out ahead of her in the September afternoon light, was more complicated than fear. It was the awareness of a version of herself that had lived here and was not entirely continuous with the person in the car. The woman who had carried eggs up 4 flights of stairs. The woman who had sat in a car for 22 minutes and then driven to Suki's apartment. She recognized that woman as herself, but knew her as someone in a previous chapter. The same book, a different section. She found Suki's apartment building. She found parking. She unbuckled a still sleeping Lila from her seat with the practiced care of a parent who has learned to move sleeping children like unexploded ordnance. Suki opened the door before she'd knocked. They looked at each other for a moment. Suki and Elena, 3 years of phone calls and visits, and 2-hour drives, and the ongoing closeness of people who have chosen each other through enough hardship to make it mean something. Then Suki looked at Lila, asleep on Elena's shoulder. and her face did something it didn't often do, which was become visibly moved. "Hi," Suki whispered. "She'll be awake in 10 minutes and ask you 17 questions," Elena whispered back. "I know. I'm ready." It was 14 questions, which was close enough. Saturday arrived with the quality of a day that has been prepared for, the specific heightened attention of something significant approaching. Elena had brought the one good dress she owned, a deep blue wrap dress she'd bought 2 years ago for the firm's holiday dinner, and which still fit, and which Lila had declared very shiny that morning, with evident approval. Lila wore a yellow dress that Petra had helped pick out, and red shoes she had insisted on, and carried the brown horse in her jacket pocket because she wanted him there. Elena had negotiated the horse down from the full stuffed animal collection Lila had initially proposed bringing. Suki drove. The Whitmore Hotel was in the northern part of the city, a building Elena didn't know well. She'd passed it before, registered the awning, never had occasion to go in. It was the kind of hotel that served as a backdrop for the city's formal civic life, the charity galas and foundation dinners, and awards ceremonies that moved through its ballroom on a rotating schedule of causes and tax-deductible generosity. They arrived at 6:15. The setup crew was still finishing when the family arrivals began. Elena checked in at the foundation table and collected her credentials, and a young woman named Priya, who coordinated the children's art exhibition, took them to the gallery section, a long corridor off the main ballroom, hung with work from 8 young artists across the region, each section labeled with the child's name and a brief note. Lila's section was at the far end. 8 drawings. The horse cloud in the center, slightly larger frame, the harbor painting to its left, the series of people walking arranged along the bottom in a line, and 2 horse drawings Elena had forgotten she'd framed flanking the portrait of Ned. Real frames, proper lighting, the small typed card. Lila Hart, age 3, Harrow's Cove. Lila stood in front of them and did not say anything for a full 30 seconds, which was, for Lila, equivalent to silence on a geological scale. Then she said, "They look different here." "They do," Elena said. "Better," Lila said. "I think so too." Lila looked at the horse cloud for a long moment. "The cloud horse looks real here," she said. Elena crouched down beside her. "Yeah, it does." Lila turned to look at her mother with an expression that was new, something she'd remember later, the first time she saw her daughter looking at her own work from the outside, understanding it as something separate from herself, something that existed in the world. It was a complicated expression for a 3-year-old to carry, and she carried it for exactly 4 seconds before she pointed at the Ned portrait and said, "Ned looks worried," in a tone of mild concern. "He always looks a little worried," Elena said. "I know," Lila said. "That's his face." The gala filled by 8 o'clock. Elena had anticipated an event she'd navigate from the edges. Present enough to be present, removed enough to stay comfortable. She was not a person who moved easily through large formal gatherings, had never been, but she had learned over the years to manage them with a kind of practical competence that wasn't the same as ease, but served the same function. She and Suki found a table near the gallery corridor entrance, and Elena kept one eye on Lila, who had discovered that the gala offered an exceptional selection of things to study and had begun her survey of the room with the systematic focus she applied to everything interesting. She was being shepherded by Priya, who had recognized in Lila a child who required management rather than containment and had made herself available for questions. Lila had approximately 16 questions about the chandeliers. The room filled with exactly the kind of people Elena had expected: foundation donors, arts advocates, corporate sponsors, the civic infrastructure of a functioning city in its formal occasion clothes. It was a good event, well organized, the kind that served its purpose without drawing attention to its own machinery. She was on her second glass of water when she saw him. He came in from the main entrance, on the far side of the ballroom, with 2 other men in suits she didn't recognize, moving with the particular quality of someone who arrives at these events as a matter of professional attendance rather than personal enthusiasm. He was in a dark suit, no tie, the jacket well fitted in the way that expensive things fit. He looked the same, older, slightly, in the way that people look different when you haven't seen them in 3 years, and the difference is real, not dramatic. A small settling, a solidity, still recognizably himself. Adrian Cross, at the Hargrove Foundation Gala. Elena set her water glass down. She had not imagined this specifically. She had imagined, in the abstract way that honest people allow themselves to think about low-probability things, that returning to the city meant returning to his proximity. She had not imagined a ballroom, a September Saturday, 8 of her daughter's drawings on a corridor wall 30 feet from where they were both standing. She turned back to her table. Suki was saying something about the centerpiece. "Suki," Elena said. Suki looked at her face and stopped talking about the centerpiece. "He's here," Elena said. Suki followed her gaze with the discretion of someone who had been tracking this possibility for 3 years. She located him. She turned back to Elena with an expression that was doing several things at once. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Elena agreed. "Do you want to leave?" Elena thought about Lila, who was in the gallery corridor asking Priya about chandeliers, who had looked at the horse cloud and said it looked real here, who was wearing a yellow dress and red shoes and had the brown horse in her pocket. "No," Elena said. Suki nodded. "Then we stay, and we see what happens." "Nothing has to happen." "Right," Suki said, in the tone of someone who is not certain about that. But Adrian was at the gala because CrossVault was a mid-tier sponsor of the Hargrove Foundation's education initiative. His PR director had arranged it 8 months ago as part of a corporate giving strategy, and his name had been on the list for the annual gala as a matter of course. He attended these events the way he attended most of his calendar, with competence and partial presence. He arrived with 2 colleagues, Marcus, his head of partnerships, and a board member named Philip who had insisted on attending and who Adrian had allowed to come because Philip was useful and difficult to refuse. They collected drinks at the bar and began the circuit of the room that these events required, handshakes and brief conversations with people who were important in specific sectors, the maintenance work of an executive presence. He was half attending to a conversation about regional arts education grants when Philip touched his arm and nodded toward the gallery corridor. "They've got a children's section," Philip said. "My granddaughter does this kind of thing. Come look." Adrian followed, mostly because the conversation had been running its course anyway, and the gallery was a reason to change position. He followed Philip through the corridor entrance and slowed to look at the work along the walls. Children's drawings and paintings in a range of approaches, the specific quality of young art, which was either timid or absolutely confident, rarely middle ground. The timid ones were technically better. The confident ones were more interesting. He was looking at a set of paintings from a 7-year-old in the northern suburbs, competent, careful, impressive for the age. When Philip moved ahead and Adrian followed and the corridor turned slightly and he saw the section at the end. He saw the girl first. She was standing in front of the drawings with her back to him, in a yellow dress with red shoes, and she was explaining something to a young woman beside her with the authoritative specificity of a child who has very clear ideas. She was small, 3, perhaps, or close to it. She gestured at the drawing in the center frame as she talked, a wide gesture that nearly took in the whole drawing, and something in the gesture, the particular arc of it, the unconscious confidence of it, made him stop walking. Philip said something. Adrian didn't hear it. The girl turned slightly to point at a different drawing, and he saw her profile, the shape of her face. Her eyes, dark, specific, with that particular quality of focused attention, the brow drawn slightly in as she looked at something that interested her. A smile starting at the corner of her mouth over something the young woman said. His smile. The one from photographs of himself as a child that he'd always been told was his father's before that. The angle of it, the way it appeared before it fully landed. The world did a thing it rarely did, which was stop. Philip was still talking. Adrian was not hearing him. He was looking at a 3-year-old girl in a yellow dress who had his eyes and his smile, and who was explaining to anyone who would listen why the horse in the drawing in the center frame was also a cloud. A hand came into his peripheral vision, a woman crouching down beside the girl, one hand on her back, saying something close to her ear. He looked at the woman, Elena. She was crouching beside the child with her hand on the small back, and she was already looking up, already looking at him, because she had been watching the corridor entrance and she had seen him the moment he entered. Their eyes met across 12 feet of gallery corridor. Adrian Cross stood very still. The girl turned and looked at him with the open, uncomplicated curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to manage her attention. She studied him for a moment with those specific eyes, and then looked back at her drawings with the decisive efficiency of someone who has assessed a situation and returned to more important matters. Elena straightened up. She didn't move toward him. She stood beside her daughter with her hand still on the girl's shoulder and waited, and her face was doing what his was doing, which was holding very still, while the interior did something much louder. Philip had noticed. He said Adrian's name. "Give me a minute," Adrian said. Philip drifted diplomatically back toward the main room. Marcus, who had not entered the corridor, remained absent. It was just the corridor and the drawings, and the girl in the yellow dress, and Elena standing 6 feet away from him with an expression that was not quite prepared for this exact moment, which told him that she hadn't engineered it and hadn't wanted it, and was getting through it the same way he was. He walked forward. He stopped at a distance that was close enough to speak without being overheard. Lila, between them, had returned to the horse cloud, discussing it with herself in a low, concentrated murmur. "Elena," he said. "Adrian," she said. 2 names. The same weight as 3 words delivered in a kitchen, except different, heavier and more freighted and entirely without the managerial calm of that night. He looked different to her up close. Not worse, not better. Just human, in a way the magazine photograph hadn't been. He had lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked like someone who had been working hard for a long time without rest. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at the girl. He couldn't not look at the girl. "Her name is Lila," Elena said, and there was something in the way she said it. Not apologetic, not defiant, just direct. The tone of someone stating a fact that is going to have consequences and has decided to let it have them. Adrian looked at the drawings on the wall, looked at the card. Lila Hart, age 3. Looked at Lila, who was pointing at the harbor painting now, nodding to herself. He looked back at Elena. "How old?" he said, and stopped, because the arithmetic was simple, and he was already doing it, and he did not need the number from her to understand what the number meant. 3, Elena said. "October." He looked at her for a long moment. Something was happening to his face that he was not fully governing, not breaking, not dramatic, not what a scene would require, but a kind of quiet unraveling around the eyes, the jaw, the specific way a person looks when something lands that they did not see coming and cannot deflect. "She's mine," he said. Not a question. He knew the answer before he asked. Elena held his gaze. "Yes." The word landed in the corridor and neither of them moved. Lila turned around at that moment, not because of anything, just because she was done with the harbor painting and ready to report on the people walking series, and found a stranger standing close to her mother and looked at him with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't looking. "Hi," Lila said. Adrian looked down at her. He appeared to be having some difficulty. "Hi," he said. His voice came out lower than he intended and slightly rough, and he cleared his throat. Lila pointed at the drawings. "That is my horse cloud," she said. "It is a cloud that is also a horse. They are both at the same time." Adrian looked at the drawing. "I see that," he said. "Do you understand it?" Lila asked, with genuine inquiry, the way she asked questions. Not testing, just wanting to know. He looked at the drawing for a moment. "I think so," he said. "It's 2 things at once." Lila nodded, satisfied. "Yes," she said. "Most things are 2 things." She considered this briefly. "My horse Ned is a horse, but also my friend." "Is Ned here?" Adrian managed. Lila reached into her jacket pocket and produced the stuffed penguin with the gravity of a person producing evidence. "That's a penguin," Adrian said. "Yes," Lila said. "His name is Ned, and he is a horse." Adrian looked at Elena. Elena looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, and was the specific combination of watching something inevitable arrive that you have been preparing for and not quite preparing for at the same time. She has very clear opinions, Elena said. I can see that, he said. Lila replaced Ned in her pocket with professional efficiency and turned back to the drawings, attention complete, ready to deliver her assessment of the People Walking series to whoever was listening. Priya materialized at the corridor entrance, and Lila moved toward her with the horse cloud still apparently in discussion. Elena and Adrian were left standing 5 feet apart in the corridor with the drawings on the wall and the sound of the gala continuing in the next room, and absolutely nothing between them except 3 years and a daughter, and the question that had been building since Elena set a grocery bag on a counter and walked out of an apartment. You didn't tell me, he said. His voice was even, not accusing, not yet, because he was not in a state to be accusatory. He was in the state of someone managing an impact, focusing on the information before the feeling, because that was how he was built. No, Elena said. I didn't. Why? She had thought about how she would answer this if the moment ever came. She had rehearsed versions of it, discarded them, arrived at something closer to the actual truth, which was less tidy than any version she'd rehearsed. Because of the way you said it, she said. 3 words, Adrian. You put your phone down, and you didn't look at me, and you said you'd found someone else, and you waited for me to accept it. And I did. I accepted it. I went home and found out I was pregnant, and I sat on the floor of my bathroom, and I thought about coming back to tell you. And I thought about what that would look like. Walking back in with news you didn't ask for, fitting into the narrative of the woman who couldn't let go. I thought about what my life would look like, connected to you permanently, negotiating everything with a man who had decided I didn't fit. She paused. I decided Lila deserved better than that as a starting point. He was quiet for a moment. She deserved to know her father. Yes, Elena said. She did. She does. That's a conversation we're going to have eventually, and I know that. I've known that. She looked at him directly. But you don't get to make that the headline. Not tonight. He looked at her. Something in him wanted to argue. She could see it. The reflex of a man accustomed to restructuring situations that weren't performing optimally. But something else was there too, under the reflex. Something that had been on those long city walks. Something that had accumulated quietly in the space left by everything he'd been building toward without arriving. She looks like you, he said finally. The face, he stopped. But she smiles like... He stopped again. I know, Elena said quietly. Lila's voice came from the corridor entrance, addressing Priya. The people walking ones are good because they are moving, and you can tell. Adrian looked at his daughter's back. The yellow dress, the red shoes, the way she held herself, the particular confidence of a child who has been loved without condition since before she knew what love was. He had missed 3 years, not because of malice, not because of a decision he'd made knowing the consequences. He had to sit with that. He could see it clearly. He had made a decision that had seemed like clarity and had turned out to be a different thing entirely. He had decided Elena didn't fit. He had calculated this future and left someone out of it, and the thing he'd left out had come back as a person in a yellow dress who thought a penguin named Ned was a horse. Something broke in him that was different from regret. Regret was looking back. This was standing in the present and understanding what the present cost. I'm not going to demand anything, he said. His voice was quieter now. The executive tone had gone somewhere else. I'm not in a position to demand anything. I know that. Elena watched him. She had spent 3 years imagining this moment in various forms, and the actual version was different from all of them. Not explosive, not resolved, not clean. Just 2 adults in a corridor at a charity gala, their daughter 20 feet away discussing movement and art with a foundation coordinator. I know we have things to figure out, Elena said. I know we do. He looked at Lila again, then back at Elena. Can I say hello to her? Properly. Elena considered this. She looked at Lila, who had come back from the entrance and was now standing in front of the harbor painting again, reconsidering it with fresh eyes. She doesn't know who you are, Elena said. I know she doesn't. She'll ask. I know. Elena exhaled. Don't tell her tonight, she said. Not here, not like this. Not at a party with 100 people and nowhere to process it. She's 3, Adrian. This has to be done right. I understand, he said. She looked at him for another moment and saw, underneath the well-fitted jacket and the executive composure and the 3 years of accumulated success, the beginning of something she recognized as genuine, not performed, not calculated. Just a man standing in a corridor looking at a small person he hadn't known existed until 7 minutes ago and feeling the exact weight of that. She turned toward Lila. Baby. Lila turned. Come say hi to someone. Lila crossed the corridor with the unhurried confidence of a child who knows the world will wait for her and stopped in front of Adrian and looked up at him with the direct, assessing gaze she gave to everything interesting. Adrian crouched down to her level. He was not practiced at this. She could see him calibrating, adjusting, not sure of the right distance or register. He landed on something that was genuine if slightly uncertain, which was better than polished. Your drawings are really good, he said. Lila looked at him with serious attention. I know, she said. Which one do you like? He looked up at the wall. He looked at the horse cloud in its center frame, the harbor, the people walking, the Ned portrait. The horse cloud, he said. Lila's expression did the thing it did when something confirmed what she already believed. Yes, she said. That is the best one. She tilted her head. Do you draw? Not well. That is okay, Lila said with genuine magnanimity. You can learn. Adrian looked at her. He appeared to be having ongoing difficulty with his face. Maybe I can, he said. Lila nodded, apparently satisfied with this, and turned back to her drawings. She was done with the conversation. She had gathered the information she needed and moved on, as she always did. Adrian stood back up, and Elena was there, watching him, and there was no sound in the corridor except the distant music from the ballroom and Lila explaining to herself which cloud in the harbor painting was also a horse. He started. I know, Elena said. He looked at Elena, and for the first time in the entire conversation, the composure slipped enough for her to see what was underneath it. Not guilt, not yet, but something rawer. The specific expression of a man who is looking at a consequence he cannot optimize his way past and does not want to. I don't know what I'm asking for, he said. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. That's true, Elena said. I know. They stood in the corridor with Lila between them, drawing conclusions about clouds. I'm not going back to Harrow's Cove until Sunday, Elena said finally. If you want to talk, not this. You have until Sunday morning. He nodded. When? Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. There's a coffee place on Meridian Street, the one that used to be a hardware store. You probably know it. He did. I'll be there, he said. She looked at him for one more moment, long enough to look, short enough not to want anything specific from what she saw. And then she turned back to her daughter, put her hand on Lila's shoulder, said something close to her ear that made Lila look at the horse cloud one last time and nod with the gravity of someone completing an inspection. They walked back toward the main ballroom. Lila waved at Ned in her pocket. Elena did not look back. Adrian stood in the gallery corridor alone, in front of his daughter's drawings, in the specific silence of a man who has just seen the shape of everything he had walked away from and understood for the first time exactly what shape it was. He didn't sleep. He knew he wouldn't before he even left the hotel, standing on the sidewalk outside the Whitmore at 10:30 with his jacket over his arm and the September air doing nothing in particular for the specific quality of what was happening in his chest. Marcus had found him eventually, and they'd shared a cab back to the office building where Adrian's car was parked. And Marcus, who was perceptive in the way that people who have worked closely with someone for 5 years become perceptive, had not asked any questions. He'd said goodnight and gotten out, and that was all. Adrian drove home. He stood in his kitchen, the Garfield Tower kitchen, clean and designed and entirely impersonal in the way he was only now registering, and poured a glass of water he didn't drink and stood at the counter and did what he almost never permitted himself, which was to stop moving and let the thing land. He had a daughter, 3 years old, October. She had been alive for 3 years. She had learned to walk without him there. She had learned to talk, and she could talk, with a specificity and confidence that had startled him, the vocabulary of a child who had been listened to. She had named a penguin Ned, and decided it was a horse, and held that position with total conviction. She had looked at him with his own eyes and asked if he understood the horse cloud, which was a cloud that was also a horse, because most things were two things at once. He put his glass down and pressed both palms flat on the counter and looked at the window above the sink, which showed him nothing but his own reflection and the dark city behind it. He had made a calculation 3 years ago. He had decided Elena didn't fit the life he was building, and he had delivered that decision with the clean efficiency of someone who had resolved a situation. He had been proud of that efficiency, in the small private way that you can be proud of your own emotional management. No scene, no drawn-out ending, clean. He had walked away from a woman who was pregnant with his child, and he had not known it, and the not knowing did not make him responsible for less. He understood that. He was a man who could follow an argument to its conclusion, even when the conclusion was uncomfortable, and the conclusion here was that his choices had built the conditions for a 3-year absence. He had not been present for those 3 years because of a decision he'd made with complete confidence and incomplete information, and the incompleteness of the information had not made the decision less consequential. He stayed at the counter for a long time. At some point, he moved to the couch and sat there in the dark and thought about his own father, who had died when Adrian was 23 and who had been present in the specific way that some men of that generation were present, physically available, emotionally difficult to reach, proud in ways he expressed sideways rather than directly. He had loved his father with the particular longing of someone always trying to read a signal that wasn't quite transmitting clearly. He had carried that longing into adulthood and built an empire partly out of the energy it generated, and he had not, until this moment in his dark apartment, connected those things clearly. His daughter had been alive for 3 years. She had been alive in a cottage in a seaside town with a lemon tree in the yard, and she had drawn horses and clouds and a worried penguin named Ned, and she had grown up entirely without him, entirely well, surrounded by people who had shown up for her in the ways that he had not been there to show up. He did not sleep. The coffee place on Meridian Street was called the Ironworks, named for the hardware store it had replaced, and it still had the bones of the original space: exposed brick, wide plank floors, the kind of ceiling that suggested industrial purpose repurposed for something gentler. Elena arrived at 9:50 with Lila at Suki's apartment, where Suki had taken the morning with cheerful deliberateness, setting up an art project on her kitchen table with the focused energy of someone who understood exactly why Elena needed this hour clear. She ordered a coffee and took a table near the window and sat with it and thought about nothing specific, which was the best she could do. She had slept adequately, which surprised her. She had expected to lie awake and instead had gone under with the particular depth of someone who has been braced for something and can finally stop bracing. The gala had happened. The corridor had happened. He had seen Lila, and Lila had told him the horse cloud was the best one and that most things were two things, and he had crouched down to her level with uncertain calibration and genuine effort, and Elena had watched all of it from 2 feet away. She had felt many things. She was still sorting them. He came in at 10:02, which she registered without judgment. He ordered at the counter, black coffee, no deliberation, and came to the table and sat down across from her, and they looked at each other with the specific quality of people who have already had the first part of a difficult conversation and are now at the second part, which is always harder. "How is she this morning?" he asked. "Making art projects with Suki," Elena said. "She's fine. She doesn't know anything happened." He nodded. He had the look of someone who hadn't slept, carrying it in the careful steadiness of a person who is accustomed to functioning on inadequate rest and knows how to hold it together. "I thought about what I was going to say," he said. "I had it worked out, coming here." He turned his coffee cup once. "I don't have it anymore." "Okay," Elena said. "I want to apologize," he said, "for the way I ended things. Not just strategically, because it was a bad way to treat a person I had loved, and I knew it was a bad way, and I did it anyway because I had convinced myself that clean was the same as kind." Elena looked at him. This was not what she had expected, which was some version of the negotiating posture of a man accustomed to restructuring unfavorable situations. "That's not why I didn't tell you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I didn't withhold Lila as punishment. I know that. I withheld the information because I genuinely believed, I still believe, That walking back into a relationship with a man who had just decided I didn't fit, carrying a pregnancy he didn't ask for, was not a foundation I was willing to build her life on. I understand that, he said. Do you? Because I need you to actually understand it, not just accept it as a reasonable position. He looked at her. You were protecting her, he said, from the version of me that existed 3 years ago. I think that version I think he would have done the right things. I think he would have written the checks and set up the custody arrangement and been reliably present in the ways that could be scheduled. And I think that would have been exactly as inadequate as you knew it would be. Elena was quiet for a moment. Yeah, she said. I'm not that version anymore, he said. I'm not saying that to make a case for myself. I'm saying it because I think it's true, and I think you deserve the honest version. He paused. I ended things with Meredith in the spring. I've spent this year trying to figure out why everything I built feels like it's missing something. I don't have a clean answer to that. I'm not walking in here with a plan. Good, Elena said. Because if you'd walked in here with a plan, I would have left. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The beginning of one. I have a daughter, he said, and his voice broke slightly on the word, not dramatically, just the specific quality of a word that has not yet been said aloud, and carries more weight than the speaker was fully prepared for. Elena looked at him. You have a daughter, she said. They sat with that for a moment. I want to know her, he said. I'm not asking for anything that overrides what you've built. I'm not asking to restructure her life. I want to know her. I want to be in it. Whatever that looks like, whatever pace you set, whatever terms you need. I understand it starts from zero. It starts below zero, Elena said. You have no relationship with her. She doesn't know you exist. You're going to have to build something from nothing, and it has to be built carefully, because she's 3 and she's already a specific person, and she doesn't need a stranger arriving and disrupting things. I know. And if you start something with her, you don't get to stop. You don't get to decide it's more complicated than you thought and recalculate. She's not something you can recalculate out of. Elena, his voice was very even. I understand that. I need you to understand it the way I understand it, she said. Not as a concept, as a thing you live. He held her gaze. Tell me what you need me to do next. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes, which was longer than either of them had planned. They talked practically. What Lila knew, what she didn't, how the conversation about her father would have to be structured, what timeline made sense, what the first steps looked like. Elena was specific and direct in the way she always was when she was managing something important. And Adrian was quieter than she remembered him being, listening more than talking, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was doing something she recognized as unfamiliar to him, which was following rather than leading. He asked questions about Lila. Careful ones, specific ones, not the broad strokes questions of someone gathering data, but the questions of someone who actually wanted to know. What was her favorite book right now? What did she do when she was scared? What made her laugh? Elena answered. The current book was one about a rabbit who could not find his other shoe, which Lila had opinions about on multiple levels. She got scared of specific sounds, sudden loud ones, not gradual ones, and her response was to go very still rather than cry, which was sometimes more alarming. She laughed at things that were unexpectedly specific. The word elbow reliably got her, for reasons she had never explained and possibly couldn't. The word elbow, Adrian said. Every time, Elena said. I don't know why. Don't ask her. I won't. He looked at his coffee. She'd tell me it's because most things are 2 things. Elena looked at him. He was not smiling, but something had changed in his face, a quality of presence that hadn't been there in the kitchen 3 years ago, the particular attention of someone who has decided to actually be where he is. She told him about Harrow's Cove, not the difficult parts, not the February behind on rent or the 3 a.m. fear, but the shape of the life. Gus next door, Dottie and the bookshop, Petra and the flower stall, the lemon tree, the harbor in the winter light, the way the town had assembled itself around them, imperfectly and genuinely. He listened. She could see him constructing it, the cottage, the town, the life. and she watched his face do something that was not quite guilt, but was adjacent to it. The awareness of what had been built in his absence, what had been required. "She's happy," Elena said, not to comfort him, just because it was true and relevant. "She has been well loved. Whatever else this is, she's okay." "I can see that," he said, "in the way she is. She walks into a room like she expects it to be interesting." Elena recognized that observation as accurate. "She does. You gave her that." "She came with some of it," Elena said. He looked at her steadily. "I'm going to try to do this right," he said. "I know that doesn't mean much yet. I know it only means something if I actually do it. But I want you to know that's the intention I'm walking in with." "I know you mean it right now," Elena said. "That's not the same as knowing it holds." "Fair," he said. "I'll watch," she said. "Lila will tell me. She's a very accurate reporter. If you show up for her, she'll show that. If you don't, she'll show that too." "What do we tell her?" he said. "When?" Elena had thought about this. She had thought about it in fragments for 3 years and in concentrated effort since the gala corridor. "Not yet," she said. "Not while she doesn't know you. Let her know you first. As a person, someone her mother trusts enough to include. When she knows you, the information will land differently." "How do we do that?" "I don't know exactly. I need to think about it." She looked out the window at Meridian Street, the Sunday morning foot traffic, the particular quality of a city in its slower weekend register. "There's a farmer's market in Harrow's Cove on the first Saturday of every month. If you wanted to come down." He looked at her. "That's not an invitation to anything except the farmer's market," she said. "I'm saying it's a normal Saturday thing in a normal setting where Lila would see you in context. Her context, not yours. When's the next one?" "First Saturday of October." He nodded. "I'll be there." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she gathered her jacket and her bag. He stood when she stood, which she registered without particular meaning. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah." "She asked me last spring why she doesn't have a daddy. I told her some families are different shapes." She paused. "I don't want to keep telling her that forever. I want her to have an honest answer, eventually. I'm giving you the chance to be part of that answer. Don't make me regret it." He looked at her, and she saw in his face the same thing she had seen in the corridor, not the executive composure, not the managed expression of a man who has rehearsed the moment, but something underneath all of that, something older and less protected. "I won't," he said. She believed him the appropriate amount. Not fully, but enough to take the next step and see what it built. He came to the farmer's market on the first Saturday of October. He drove down himself, no assistant, no preparation beyond a text to Elena the evening before confirming the time, which she had answered with the address of the market and nothing else. He found parking 2 blocks away and walked to the harbor square where the market set up, and stood for a moment at the entrance taking in the particular quality of Harrow's Cove on a Saturday morning. The boats in the harbor, the stalls with their produce and flowers and jams, the specific unhurried pace of a town that was not performing itself for anyone. He found Elena at Petra's flower stall. Lila was crouching in front of a bucket of sunflowers, examining them at close range, one hand hovering without quite touching in the way Elena had taught her, explaining something to the sunflowers in a low voice. Petra was watching her with the expression of someone who finds a child genuinely entertaining. Elena saw Adrian before Lila did and straightened slightly. Not guardedly, just the adjustment of someone registering a significant arrival. "You found it," she said. "GPS works," he said, and then looked at Lila. Lila had registered a new person and was assessing him from the sunflower level with the direct, unhurried gaze she gave everything. "I remember you," she said. "You like the horse cloud one." Adrian blinked. "I do," he said. "Good memory." "I always remember what people like," Lila said, standing up, apparently satisfied with the sunflowers. "Ned likes yellow things. That's why he likes me. I have yellow things sometimes." "That makes sense," Adrian said. Petra caught Elena's eye over Adrian's shoulder and raised her eyebrows approximately a millimeter, which in Petra's expression economy was equivalent to a full sentence. Elena gave her a look that said later and turned back to the stall. They moved through the market the way it made sense to move. Lila leading, mostly, because Lila had a route and a purpose and expected the adults to follow, which they did. She stopped at a stall with local honey and had to be negotiated back from buying all of it. She stopped at Colleen's jam table, where Colleen took one look at Adrian and then at Elena with an expression that contained an entire editorial which she visibly chose not to deliver, and sold Lila a small jar of blackberry jam for the price of a hug. Adrian walked beside Elena and slightly behind, not trying to lead, not trying to insert himself into the rhythm Lila set. Elena watched him calibrating. She could see the effort, the restraint, the deliberate choice not to perform. When Lila addressed him directly, he answered at her level, without condescension, without the particular falseness of adults who don't know children well trying to speak their language. He wasn't naturally fluent in it, but he was trying in the right way, listening more than talking, asking questions that were actually curious, not visibly impatient with the non-linear logic of a 3-year-old's attention. Lila stopped in front of a stall selling handmade wooden toys. There was a painted horse on the top shelf. "That one," Lila said. "We have horses at home," Elena said. "That one is different," Lila said, with complete confidence. Elena looked at Adrian. Something moved across his face, a flicker of something, the specific awareness of a moment. "Can I?" he said quietly. Elena hesitated. Not to make a point, he said. "She likes the horse." Elena nodded once. He bought the horse. The vendor wrapped it in tissue paper, and Lila received it with the solemnity of someone accepting a significant object. She examined it for a full minute, turning it over, assessing its quality. "His name is Sunday," she said. "Why Sunday?" Adrian asked. Lila looked at him. "Because he is new," she said. "New things are Sundays." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I like that," he said. Lila tucked Sunday under her arm and walked on. Elena walked beside Adrian and did not say anything for a moment. Then quietly, "Thank you." "I didn't do it to score points." "I know," she said. "That's why I said thank you." He came back the following month, and the month after that. The visits did not follow a script. They arranged them through brief, practical text exchanges. Elena offering a time, Adrian confirming, neither of them elaborating beyond what was necessary. November was the farmer's market and then the bookshop, where Dottie assessed Adrian with the methodology of someone who has read a great many people across a great many decades and has developed reliable shortcuts. She did not introduce herself warmly. She asked him one question about what he was currently reading, listened to his answer, and returned to her inventory without comment. "What was that?" he said to Elena afterward, on the sidewalk outside. "She liked you," Elena said. He looked at the bookshop window. "That's what that looks like." "She didn't tell you the thing you said was wrong. That's high marks from Dottie." He came in December, which was the first time Lila invited him to do something rather than simply including him in what she was already doing. She was drawing at the kitchen table in the cottage. Elena had let him come to the cottage for the first time, a deliberate shift, Lila's space rather than neutral territory. And she looked up when he arrived and said without preamble, "You can draw with me." It was not a question. Adrian sat down at the kitchen table with Lila and Drew. He was, as he had warned, not good. His horse looked like a table with a head, which Lila regarded with the generosity of a professional reviewing a student's work. "It needs a neck," she said. "I can't draw a neck," he said. "I'll show you." She took his paper and added a neck with complete confidence. She handed it back. "Now it's better." He looked at the drawing. "It is better," he agreed. Elena stood at the kitchen counter and watched her daughter correct a CEO's horse drawing with the authority of someone who has always known exactly what she was doing and felt the specific quality of a moment she would remember. Not because it was large, but because of what it contained, the particular ordinary, extraordinary nature of Lila doing what Lila did. And Adrian sitting at her kitchen table in Harrow's Cove learning to draw a neck from a 3-year-old. She made tea. She brought 2 cups to the table and set one near Adrian without comment, and he looked up and said thank you without breaking the drawing lesson, and the afternoon continued. The harder conversations happened later. In January, Elena told Gus, She did it on a Tuesday evening over the fence between their yards, which was where they'd had most of their real conversations over 3 years. The fence as the specific geography of honest talk, both of them with their elbows on it, looking at the yard or the street rather than each other, because sometimes that made things easier to say. "The man who comes on Saturdays," Gus said. "He's Lila's father." Gus was quiet for a moment. He had a coffee cup in both hands. He looked at the lemon tree. "Does she know?" "Not yet." "Does he know he's going to have to earn it?" "I've been pretty clear about that." Gus nodded. He turned his cup slowly. "He seems to actually show up," he said, "which is more than you can say for some. It's 3 months. 3 months of actually showing up is more than some people manage in 3 years, Gus said, which was pointed without being aimed at anyone specific, which was Gus's particular skill. Elena looked at the lemon tree, which had survived another season with the quiet stubbornness of something that had decided this was where it lived. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "I know what I'm not doing. I'm not letting guilt make the decisions. I'm not going back to something because it's easier than the alternative. But beyond that, I don't have a clear map." "Nobody has a clear map," Gus said. "Maps are for the parts other people already walked." She looked at him. "That's very wise for someone who just said it about maps." "I've been saving it," he said. She laughed, and it was the real kind, the kind you don't see coming, that takes you by surprise and lands completely. She told Dottie in February, which was different because Dottie already knew the outline and had the conversational patience of someone who had read 10,000 novels and understood that the middle sections were where the real work happened. "You're not in love with him," Dottie said. It wasn't a question. "Not right now," Elena said. "That's honest," Dottie said. "Do you think you could be?" Elena thought about this seriously because Dottie didn't ask questions she didn't mean. "I think I don't know who he is anymore," she said. "I knew who he was 3 years ago, and I chose him, and that person made a calculation and left. The person who has been showing up on Saturdays is different enough that I'd have to start from scratch." "That's not the same as no," Dottie said. "It's not the same as yes either." Dottie made a sound that was neither agreement nor disagreement and went back to her inventory list. Then she said, without looking up, "He looked at the horse cloud drawing when he came in November. Stood in front of it for 2 minutes while you were in the back room." Elena was quiet. "Didn't say anything about it," Dottie continued. "Just looked at it." Elena thought about the horse cloud, hanging in its frame by the fireplace where she'd hung it after the gala. Lila's drawing of a thing that was 2 things at the same time. She thought about a man standing in front of it for 2 minutes in an empty bookshop. "Dottie," she said. "I'm not saying anything," Dottie said. "I'm reporting facts." In February, Elena sat Lila down and started the conversation. Not the full one, not yet, not all of it, but the beginning. It was a Sunday evening, Lila in her pajamas, the stuffed horse Sunday tucked under one arm. He had joined the rotation, taken a position of honor beside the brown horse, and Elena sat on the edge of the bed and chose her words with the care she gave to things that mattered. "You know how you asked me once about daddies," Elena said. Lila looked at her with the specific attention she gave to things that were important. "You asked why some kids have daddies, and you don't," Elena said. "Do you remember?" "I said we have Gus," Lila said. "We do have Gus, and Dottie, and Suki, and Petra, and Colleen. We have a lot of people." Elena looked at her daughter's face. "You also have a daddy. He's someone I knew before you were born. For a long time he didn't know about you, but now he does." Lila processed this with the stillness she brought to significant information. "Where is he?" "He lives in the city," Elena said. "You've met him." Lila's brow drew in, the expression that meant active computation. "The man who bought Sunday," she said. Elena felt her chest tighten in the way it sometimes did when Lila said something that was exactly accurate in a way Elena hadn't anticipated. "Yes," she said. "His name is Adrian." Lila looked at Sunday, the painted horse, sitting in his place of honor. He bought him for me, Lila said, not surprised, just fitting the pieces together. He did. Lila was quiet for a long moment. Then, does he draw bad horses? Yes, Elena said. You helped him make the neck better. Something moved across Lila's face. Not the big emotional response Elena had braced for, but something quieter and more considered. She was 3.5, and 3.5-year-olds had not yet developed the architecture for large grief or large joy, but they had something better, which was the direct, honest intake of information without the narrative overlay adults brought to everything. Okay, Lila said. Okay, Elena said. Is he coming on Saturday? Lila asked. He can, Elena said. Lila pulled Sunday closer and looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has resolved something. He should practice the neck more, she said. Elena laughed softly, a single surprise sound. I'll tell him, she said. Me. She told Adrian the following morning, on the phone, standing in the kitchen before work. She told him what she'd said and what Lila had said, and she heard on his end of the line a silence that lasted long enough to mean something. She knew it was me, he said. She connected the horse, Elena said. Another silence. Then quietly. She kept it. Sunday. He's in the rotation. He is, Elena said. She heard him exhale. A long, releasing sound, the specific quality of someone who has been holding something and is allowed to set it down, just slightly. She wants you to practice drawing necks, Elena said. He made a sound that was, for Adrian Cross, the closest thing to a genuine laugh she had heard from him in 3 years. Not the polished version, not the executive at an event version, but the real one, surprised out of him by a 3-year-old's judgment of his artistic limitations. I'll practice, he said. She'll test you, Elena said. I expect she will. Elena stood in her kitchen in the February morning with the phone in her hand and thought about the man on the other end of the call. Not the man from the kitchen with the marble counter, not the cover story, but this one, the one who had driven to Harrow's Cove 3 months in a row and sat at a kitchen table and let a child teach him how to draw a neck, and who had stood in front of a drawing of a horse cloud for 2 minutes in an empty bookshop without saying anything. She did not know what they were becoming. She was not going to name it before it had a name, but she could say this. When she hung up the phone, the specific weight she'd been carrying for 3 years, the low, persistent awareness of the loose thread, the unresolved thing, was lighter than it had been. Not gone, not resolved, but lighter in the way things get when the right person is finally in the room. She made coffee and went to wake Lila up, who opened her eyes and said without preamble, "Tell him the neck goes like this," and demonstrated in the air with her hand. "I'll tell him," Elena said. "He needs to practice a lot," Lila said. "I know," Elena said. "Come on. Breakfast." Lila got up and grabbed Sunday and walked to the kitchen with the brown horse under her other arm, and Elena followed her. And the morning started. And outside the Pelican Run cottage, the February light was coming in low and pale over the harbor, and the lemon tree was still there, unchanged and patient, holding its ground against the winter the same way it always had. Spring came to Harrow's Cove the way it always did. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in accumulation, small evidence building on small evidence until one morning you stepped outside and the quality of the air had changed and you understood that the season had turned while you weren't paying direct attention. The lemon tree put out new growth in March. The harbor changed color by degrees, from the flat gray-blue of winter to something with more green in it, more light sitting on the surface rather than passing through. The farmers' market expanded back to full size, the winter vendors joined by the spring ones, and Petra's flower stall went from the restrained palette of the cold months to something that stopped people on the sidewalk. Adrian came every first Saturday. And then, in March, he came on a Wednesday too. It started practically. He had a question about the drawing lesson Lila had assigned him, which was to practice drawing a horse that could also be a cloud, and he had sent Elena a photograph of his attempt, which was earnest and genuinely bad in a way that made her put her phone down on the counter and stand there for a moment before picking it up again. She had sent back, "The neck is better. The cloud part needs work." He had sent, "How do you make a cloud?" She had sent, Ask Lila on Saturday. He had replied, I don't want to wait until Saturday. She had looked at that message for a long moment. She had called him because the text exchange had reached the point where calling was more efficient. They had talked for 40 minutes. Not about the drawing, about everything around the drawing. Lila's current obsession, which had shifted from horses specifically to the question of how things moved, why the water moved the way it did, why birds changed direction all at once, why a leaf fell the specific way it fell. Adrian had listened and asked questions, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark, Elena had realized she was sitting on her kitchen counter with her coffee gone cold. Not because she was managing a co-parenting situation, but because the conversation was interesting. Because he was interesting, in the way she had forgotten or set aside or not let herself visit. She didn't say anything about this. She said she had to get back to work. He said, okay. Then, same time next week? She looked at her ceiling. Wednesday evenings work? She said. Wednesday evenings, he confirmed. And so Wednesday evenings became a thing, which was not named and not examined and not required to be anything except what it was, which was two people who had a daughter together finding out who they were now after 3 years of being different people in different lives. They talked about Lila constantly because Lila was infinite material. They talked about work, his, which was undergoing a shift he was navigating with more uncertainty than he was accustomed to, and hers, which had grown into something she was genuinely proud of. They talked about things that had nothing to do with either, which was the part that mattered most, the part that told them something. He did not push. She watched for it. The old reflexes, the executive recalibration, the decision made and delivered like a notification. And it was not there. Not perfectly. Not without effort. She could see the effort sometimes. The slight correction when he caught himself trying to lead, the deliberate patience of a man who had understood something about himself and was working with that understanding rather than against it. It was not effortless. The fact that it wasn't effortless was, paradoxically, the most trustworthy thing about it. In April, Lila asked the question Elena had known was coming. They were at the kitchen table after dinner, Lila drawing, Elena going through the week's mail, the comfortable low-key noise of a Tuesday evening, and Lila looked up from her paper with the expression that preceded important announcements. Is Adrian my daddy because you were friends? She asked. Elena set down the mail. She had the answer ready, had been carrying it for months, had turned it over and tested its different surfaces, had tried to find the version that was honest and age-appropriate and didn't ask Lila to hold more than she could at 3.5. But the prepared version and the actual moment of being asked were always different things, and she sat with it for a second before she spoke. He's your daddy. Because he's your daddy, she said. Before you were born, he and I knew each other, and you came from both of us. That makes him your father. Lila drew a line on her paper. But he didn't live here, she said. No, he lived in the city. He didn't know about you for a while. When he found out, he wanted to know you. That's why he comes on Saturdays. And Wednesdays, Lila said, because Lila tracked things. And Wednesdays, Elena said. Lila drew another line. Does he like me? She asked, not with insecurity, but with the practical inquiry of someone assembling facts. Very much, Elena said. Lila considered this. I like him too, she said, in the tone of someone reporting on the weather, factual, unadorned, completely genuine. He is getting better at the necks. Elena looked at her daughter. He's working on it. I told him the secret, Lila said. What secret? The neck goes like a question mark, Lila said, and demonstrated in the air with her pencil. But you have to do it fast. If you go slow, it gets scared and gets straight. Elena looked at her daughter's demonstration of the horse neck's psychological requirement for speed and felt the specific quality of love that has no name. The love for a person who is fully themselves, who moves through the world with complete idiosyncratic clarity, who has assembled a system of understanding that belongs entirely to her and no one else. I'll pass that along, Elena said. He knows, Lila said. I told him last Saturday. She returned to her drawing. His horse is better now. Not good yet, but better. She called Adrian after Lila was asleep and told him about the conversation. He was quiet for a moment. She said she likes me, he said. She said you're getting better at the necks. That's basically a declaration of devotion from Lila. I know, he said. I know what her scale looks like. Elena sat in the kitchen in the April dark, the house quiet around her. The specific quality of the night that comes after the day has been fully inhabited. She wanted to know if you liked her, she said. Another silence. What did you tell her? The truth. She heard him exhale. Thank you, he said. Not for the reassurance, for the truth specifically. She understood the distinction. Adrian, she said. Yeah. She had been thinking about this for several weeks. Not the words exactly, but the direction. The honest acknowledgement of a thing that had been building in the Wednesday evenings and the Saturday mornings and the space between them. The thing she had been watching without naming because she did not trust premature names. I don't know what this is, she said. I want to be honest about that. I'm not there yet. I'm not sure where there is, but I'm not managing a situation anymore. That's different from where I was in September. He was quiet long enough that she thought she'd mishandled the calibration. Then, I'm not managing a situation either, he said. I haven't been for a while. I know, she said. I've been watching. I know you have, he said. There was no edge to it, just the acknowledgement of two people who had been honest with each other about the terms. I need it to be slow, she said. Not because I'm protecting myself from you specifically, but because Lila is watching everything and learning from everything, and I need what she sees to be real, not a performance of something we want to be. It's real, he said. I need time to know that's true. Take it, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at the kitchen window, her own reflection in the dark glass, the cottage around her that she had built from nothing into something actual. She thought about 3 years of Tuesdays and Thursdays and the specific weight of doing everything yourself. And she thought about a man who had driven to Harrow's Cove every first Saturday since October and sat at her kitchen table and learned to draw horse necks from her daughter. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes talking about nothing important, which was exactly right. But May arrived, and with it the question of what to do about the summer, which was the first genuinely logistical problem they had to solve together, rather than separately. Lila's daycare ran through June and then stopped for 8 weeks, and Elena's firm had a major project deadline in July. And she was looking at a scheduling problem with no clean solution when Adrian asked, carefully, whether there was anything he could do. I don't need you to fix it, she said immediately. I know, he said. I'm asking if there's something useful I can do. Those are different things. She looked at the calendar on her kitchen wall. The color-coded system she'd maintained for 4 years, the visual infrastructure of a solo parent managing multiple variables. She looked at the gap in July. She thought about what she actually needed versus what she was willing to ask for, which were still not the same thing, which was something she was working on. If you could take her for some mornings in July, she said, not all day, a few hours. Somewhere she'd actually want to be. I'll figure something out, he said. What he figured out was the harbor. He had found, in his research, and he did research, which she had learned to expect and had stopped finding surprising, a sailing program for young children run out of the Harrow's Cove Marina, 2 mornings a week through July, designed for kids 4 and under with a parent or guardian. He mentioned it to Elena with the particular care of someone who has learned that presentation matters as much as content. She'd have to be with you, Elena said. I know. She'd have to want to. I know that too. She thought about Lila and boats, Lila and water, Lila and new things. She thought about her daughter's specific appetite for understanding how things moved. Ask her yourself, Elena said. He asked on Saturday. He crouched down to Lila's level in the cottage kitchen while Lila was eating toast and explained the sailing program with the specificity he'd learned she required. What it was, what the boats looked like, what they'd do, how long it took. Lila listened with the focused attention she gave to things that might be interesting. Do the boats go fast? She asked. The small ones do, he said. Lila looked at her toast, looked back at him. Would you drive the boat? The instructor would? I'd be there. Okay, Lila said, and returned to her toast with the decisiveness of someone who has settled a question and moved on. Adrian looked up at Elena over Lila's head with an expression she recognized now, the particular quiet amazement of a man who had been learning month by month that his daughter operated on her own clear internal logic, and that the greatest gift he could give her was to take it seriously. Elena raised an eyebrow. He smiled. The real one, not the executive version, the one that came in before it landed, the one that was also, she had noticed, increasingly hard to distinguish from the smile she sometimes felt on her own face in unguarded moments. July, as it turned out, saved them both. Elena's project deadline was brutal in the way that July deadlines always were: compressed timelines, dependencies that moved, a client who changed significant requirements in week 2 and expected week 4 delivery. She worked long hours at the firm and came home tired in a way she hadn't been since Lila was an infant, the specific bone-deep fatigue of intensive, concentrated effort. Adrian took Lila sailing on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He picked her up at 8, returned her at noon, and somewhere in those 4 hours each time something happened that Elena could only reconstruct from Lila's reports, which were detailed and enthusiastic and featured the harbor, the instructor whose name was Clara, the specific behavior of water when wind moved across it, and Adrian, who featured in every account with the consistency of a person who was simply, reliably there. He fell in, Lila reported on the second Tuesday. He fell in the water? He leaned too much, Lila said. Clara said that is how you learn. He had to change his shirt. Was he upset? Lila considered this. He laughed, she said, with the tone of someone reporting a significant finding. He laughed in the water. Elena thought about Adrian Cross in the water, having fallen out of a small boat in front of his 4-year-old daughter, and a sailing instructor named Clara laughing. Something shifted in her chest. Not a decision, not a declaration, just the quiet internal movement of a thing that has been positioned correctly for a while and has now settled. He brought Lila home on a Thursday in the 3rd week of July, and Elena was finishing up on her laptop at the kitchen table, and Lila came in wearing her life jacket, which she had refused to remove on the drive, and announced that she had steered the boat. The whole boat? Elena said. Part of the boat, Lila said. Clara held the rope, but I did the wheel. She dropped her bag by the door and disappeared toward her room with the focused purposefulness of someone who needs to immediately draw what just happened. Adrian stood in the kitchen doorway, damp at the edges from what appeared to have been a water-adjacent morning. She actually did, he said. Clara let her take the tiller for about 30 seconds. You'd have thought she'd been handed the country. Elena looked at him, standing in the doorway of her cottage in Harrow's Cove, wearing a slightly damp shirt, with the particular quality of someone who has spent a morning doing something that mattered and knows it. And she thought about a kitchen in the city, a marble counter, a phone set down. She thought about the bathroom floor in the studio apartment. She thought about the drive south, the GPS, the lemon tree. She thought about 3 years of building something from the ground up, alone, which had produced a person who steered a boat for 30 seconds and felt like she'd been handed the country, because that was how Elena had raised her. As someone who understood that small things done with full commitment were the real things, the things that built character and competence and the knowledge that you were capable. She thought about all of this in approximately 4 seconds. Then she said, "Do you want to stay for dinner?" He looked at her, not surprised exactly. But the question had a different weight than previous invitations, and they both knew it, and he received it with the seriousness it deserved. "Yeah," he said, "I'd like that." She made pasta. Nothing elaborate, the good olive oil and the cherry tomatoes and the basil Gus had given her from his garden. And Lila came back from her room with a drawing of herself at the boat wheel, which was accurate enough to be recognizable and energetic enough to be art. She narrated the entire morning through dinner with a thoroughness that required only minimal prompting, and Adrian answered her follow-up questions and asked a few of his own, and Elena sat across the small kitchen table from both of them and ate her pasta and let the evening be what it was. After, while Lila was in the bath, she and Adrian stood at the kitchen counter doing dishes in the parallel way she had forgotten she knew, the way that two people who have been in a kitchen long enough stop negotiating the space and simply occupy it. "I keep thinking about something," he said. "What?" He dried a glass and set it down. "The day I ended things." I told you I needed someone who understood what I was building. He paused. I didn't know what I was building. I thought I did. I didn't. Elena rinsed a plate. And now? Now I know what I was building toward, he said. I just went the completely wrong direction to get to it. She looked at him, and he looked back, and there was none of the old managed composure in it, none of the executive patience, none of the calculated calm. Just a man standing in a small kitchen in a seaside town, holding a dish towel, saying something true. You lost 3 years, she said, not to wound him, because it was accurate. I know, he said. I'm not asking for them back. I'm asking for what comes next. She handed him the last dish. Their hands were close, but not quite touching, and she felt the specific quality of a moment that is about to become something, and for the first time in 3.5 years, she did not step back from it. What comes next is this, she said. Exactly this. Tuesday mornings, Saturday markets, dinner when it makes sense. Lila growing up knowing her father is someone who shows up. That's what comes next. And us? He said quietly. She looked at him. That's part of this, she said, if we do it right. He didn't push. He didn't calculate. He just nodded, and the dish towel went on the counter, and Lila's voice came through from the bathroom asking for the specific yellow cup, and Elena called back that it was in the cabinet, and the evening continued the way evenings do in houses where people are actually living. But there are things you learn about yourself in the years that break you open and don't apologize for it. Elena had learned that she was more capable than she had given herself credit for before those years arrived. Not because she was special, not because she had some exceptional reserve others lacked, but because the alternative to capability was not acceptable, and the human capacity for stubbornness in the face of the unacceptable is something that tends to surprise the person discovering it. She had learned that love is not a feeling you have or don't have, but a practice you build through specific actions over time, and that the practice can be interrupted and resumed and interrupted again, and is not dead when it is interrupted, only dormant, waiting. She had learned that children do not need perfect circumstances. They need consistent presence, honest language, and the demonstrated knowledge that they are wanted, not conditionally, not as a project, but simply, unconditionally, the way you want a thing that you cannot imagine not having. She had learned that the people who show up for the ordinary Tuesdays are the real people. Anyone can be present for the events. The Tuesdays are the measure. Adrian had learned something different and slower and harder. He had learned that efficiency is not wisdom, that the ability to make clean decisions is not the same as making right ones, that the particular loneliness he had been carrying for years was not the loneliness of needing a different kind of person in his life. It was the loneliness of a man who had been optimizing for the wrong outcomes, building structures that performed correctly without producing anything he actually needed to live inside. He had learned that a child does not care about your valuation or your board or the square footage of your kitchen. A child cares whether you showed up last Tuesday and whether you stayed for the whole thing and whether you laughed when you fell in the water instead of being embarrassed about it. A child's accounting system is completely different from the one he'd been running, and it was, in its way, more accurate because it measured presence, which was the only currency that didn't depreciate. He had learned that earning trust is structural, not gestural. It is not the grand apology or the expensive gift or the single moment of breakthrough. It is the accumulation of small kept promises. The phone call that comes when you said it would. The Saturday that happens even when it's inconvenient. The listening that continues even when you have an answer already. He had built companies. He had not understood until his daughter showed him what it meant to build something with another person rather than for them. These were not comfortable things to learn. They were not the kind of lessons that arrive cleanly, packaged with insight and resolution. They arrived slowly, often sideways, in the middle of ordinary situations, in a small boat in a harbor, in a kitchen with a dish towel, in a corridor in front of a drawing of a horse that was also a cloud. Lila's 4th birthday was in October. Elena organized the party the way she always did. The backyard, the people who mattered, food that was good rather than impressive. Gus came with a cake that said Lila on it in blue frosting, which Lila examined and declared accurate. Dottie arrived with a set of new colored pencils and a book about how different animals move, which she presented without ceremony. Petra came with Benji, who was now 4 too, and who had grown into the specific energy of a 4-year-old boy, which meant the afternoon had significant kinetic activity. Suki drove down. She and Elena stood by the fence at the back of the yard in the October afternoon watching Lila direct a game that appeared to involve Benji, Sunday the horse, the brown horse, Ned, and a complex narrative only Lila fully understood, and Suki said, "She's extraordinary, you know." "I know," Elena said. "You made that." "She made herself. I just made the conditions." "That's what making someone is," Suki said. Adrian arrived at 3, later than the others, because he had driven from the city and there had been traffic, and he had called ahead to tell Elena, which she had found she no longer braced to hear because he had made the call and the drive every time. He came in through the side gate with a wrapped package under one arm, and Lila spotted him from across the yard and came at a run, which was the full-body report of how far they had come. "You're late," Lila said, arriving. "I know, traffic." "What is traffic?" "Too many cars wanting the same road." Lila considered this. "They should take turns," she said. "They should," he agreed. "Happy birthday." She took the package with the focused seriousness of someone receiving something she intends to assess properly. Inside was a set of professional quality drawing pencils in a wooden case, the kind an actual artist would use. He had asked Dottie, who had told him exactly what to get, which Elena learned about afterward and filed carefully in the ongoing account she was keeping of who he was becoming. Lila opened the case and looked at the pencils with an expression that moved through several stages before arriving at something that was, for Lila, the highest register of response. She looked up at him and said nothing, which meant it was too big for words, which meant it was exactly right. "You can draw with them," he said. "Real ones. Like a real artist." "I am a real artist," Lila said. "I know," he said. "These are for real artists." She closed the case with the care of someone handling something valuable, tucked it under her arm, and said, "Come see my drawing from this morning," and walked toward the cottage without checking if he would follow. He followed. Elena watched them go, her daughter walking ahead with the professional confidence of someone giving a studio tour, Adrian a step behind, looking at her the way parents look at children when they think no one is watching, which is the most honest looking there is. Gus appeared beside her at the fence. "He's staying," Gus said. "He's staying," Elena agreed. Gus handed her a cup of coffee. "Good," he said, with the brevity of a man who has said what needs to be said. No. The year turned slowly and then all at once, the way years do. The Wednesday calls became Wednesday visits. The Saturday markets became Saturday afternoons. Lila learned that Sunday, the horse and the brown horse and Ned the penguin horse could be transported to Adrian's apartment in the city when she went to visit, which she did for the first time in November. One weekend, Elena driving her up, the two of them in the city together, which was strange in the specific way that returning to a place you've deliberately left is always strange, familiar, and foreign simultaneously. Elena walked through the city and felt it differently than she had at the gala. Not with the taut awareness of proximity to what she'd left, but with the more neutral recognition of a place that had been part of her history and was now, in some modified form, going to be part of Lila's. It no longer had the quality of a wound. It was just geography. She had a coffee with Suki on Saturday afternoon while Lila was with Adrian, and they sat in the same coffee shop they'd always used and talked the way they always had, easy and honest and without architecture. And Elena told her about the dish towel evening in July, and Suki listened and then said, "Are you happy?" Elena thought about the question seriously. "I think I'm more interested in the right things than in happy," she said. "I think happy is a byproduct. You build the right things and it turns up as a consequence." Suki looked at her. "That sounds like something you worked out." "It took a while," Elena said. "What are the right things?" Elena looked out the coffee shop window at the city moving past. Showing up for Lila. Doing work that's real. Being honest with the people who have earned it. She paused. Letting things develop at the pace they actually develop, instead of the pace that would make a better story. Suki looked at her for a long moment. "You seem different," she said. 3 years different, Elena said. "No," Suki said. Better different, like something resolved. It resolved in December. Not dramatically, not with an announcement or a gesture or a moment that would frame well in retrospect. It resolved the way honest things resolve, incrementally, through accumulated evidence, until one evening the thing that had been building had simply built. They were at the cottage. Lila was asleep. Adrian had stayed for dinner and they were on the porch, the December night cold and clear, the harbor dark beyond the rooftops, the particular quality of a seaside town at night in winter when the quiet is deep and specific. He said, "I love you." 3 words, like the other 3, like the 3 that had begun all of this, but so completely different in their delivery that they might have been a different language. No phone set down. Looking at her directly. No management in it, no patience that was really composure, just a man saying a thing he meant. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the bathroom floor, about the drive south, about the lemon tree and the creaking floors, and the February she'd eaten rice and beans for a month, and the morning Lila laughed for the first time, and every ordinary, hard, beautiful Tuesday since. She had not expected this to be where she arrived. She had expected to survive what happened and build something functional and good, and she had done that. And somewhere in the doing of it, without her permission or plan, something else had grown in the same soil. "I know," she said. He waited. "I love you too," she said. "I've been trying to figure out if it was the old version or a new one." "Which is it?" "New," she said. "Completely new. I don't think I could have loved the old version of you the way I love this one." He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the harbor was dark and the night was cold, and the lemon tree was there in the yard behind them, holding its ground the way it always had. And inside the cottage, their daughter was asleep with Sunday the horse and the brown horse, and Ned arranged in the precise order that was hers. He reached over and took her hand. Not a grand gesture, just a hand, taken, the ordinary weight of it. She let him hold it. This is the thing about the people who leave. You cannot know, when they go, whether the leaving will break you or make you, whether the space they leave will collapse inward or fill with something you didn't know you could build. Elena Hart did not know, on the night she picked up her keys and walked down 4 flights of stairs, that the life she was about to construct from nothing would be the truest version of herself she had ever lived. She did not know that the hardest years would produce the clearest ones, that choosing herself, choosing Lila, would require everything she had and return more than she asked for. She did not know that the man who had said, "I've found someone else," would one day sit at her kitchen table and let her daughter teach him how to draw, and that he would fall into a harbor and laugh, and that these things would matter more than the conference rooms and the valuations and all the performance of a successful life assembled according to someone else's definition. And Adrian Cross, who had been certain, who had been efficient, who had made a calculation with complete confidence and walked away from something he did not fully understand, could not have known that the thing he was walking toward was built on what he'd left behind, that the emptiness he'd been trying to fill with building and acquisition and the right kind of ambition was shaped exactly like what he'd discarded. That clarity, as he had practiced it, was just another word for incomplete information made into a policy. Neither of them could have known. That is the thing about the life that actually happens. It does not ask your permission. It does not follow the outline. It arrives in corridors at charity galas and in the eyes of a child you did not know you had. And it asks you simply what you are willing to do next. What you do next is the whole story, not the moment of rupture, not the grand realization, not the single conversation that changes everything. The story is every Tuesday, every drive to Harrow's Cove, every horse neck drawn badly and corrected patiently by a child who has known, from the first moment she understood anything, that she is loved without condition and that the world is full of things worth understanding. Lila Hart had his eyes and Elena's face and her own irreducible self, and she had grown up in a cottage on a dead-end street with a lemon tree in the yard and people who showed up, and she had learned from the showing up that this was what love looked like. Not the feeling, not the declaration, but the body of evidence accumulated over ordinary time. She would learn the whole story eventually. She would ask when she was old enough to hold it, and Elena would tell her honestly, at the level she could hold, and then more, and then the rest. She would learn that her father had been wrong, and had known it, and had changed. She would learn that her mother had been frightened and had done it anyway. She would learn that the life she lived, the cottage, the harbor, the bookshop, the people, had been built by a woman who chose forward when backward would have been easier. She would, almost certainly, draw a picture of it. It would be two things at once. Most things are. On the last Saturday of the year, the four of them went to the harbor. Elena, Adrian, Lila, and Gus, who had been invited because Lila had decided Gus was always invited to things, which was a policy Gus accepted without fuss. The harbor was quiet in the December cold, the boats in their winter configurations, the water moving the way winter water moves, slow and serious and dark. Lila stood at the edge of the dock with her hands in her pockets and looked at the water. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked, crouching beside her. She looked at the harbor for a moment. "The water goes somewhere," she said. "And then it comes back. But it is different water when it comes back." Adrian looked at the harbor, then at his daughter. "Yeah," he said. "That's right." "Is that sad?" Lila asked. He thought about it. "I don't think so," he said. "I think it's just how water works." Lila considered this. "I think it is interesting," she said finally, with the tone of someone rendering a verdict they are satisfied with. "It is interesting," he said. She took her hand out of her pocket and put it in his, with the simple, unselfconscious ease of a child who has decided someone is safe, and they stood at the edge of the harbor in the December cold and looked at the water going where water goes. Elena stood a few steps back with Gus, and she watched her daughter's hand in her father's hand, and the harbor beyond them, and the year ending the way it had arrived, not with drama, not with resolution handed down from some external source, but with the quiet accumulation of things that were true. She put her hands in her pockets. The water moved. The year turned. And in the yard on Pelican Run, the lemon tree stood its ground in the winter dark, patient as it had always been, rooted as deep as it needed to be, still and alive and exactly where it was supposed to be.